turn my speaker on, Marina, everyone. The trap of the Zoom speaker being off, which I think we're all used to. So welcome to day 3 of hearing 17B, dealing with the rural group of zones. We certainly normally start with a karakia. If there's any volunteers, or Julie, I know you'll do it for us if there's no one volunteering from the group online today.
Kia ora, Stephen. I lost the argument with Keith about which one of us was going to do it this morning, so it's me.
Lovely, thank you, Marlene.
Yeah. Tēnā koutou katoa. This is not one of my strengths, so bear with me. But it does come from the heart and the hope that it will help us listen to each other respectfully today. And it's a karakia about things that are important to us. So here goes. Manawa tina, manawa tina, manawa toka, manawa toka. Tēnei hoki tō manawa ka tina, tēnei hoki tō manawa ka toka. Tēnei hoki tō manawa ka pou tai kitea, tēnā noho tō manawa, he manawa ora, hei ora, ti hei mauri ora.
Kia Marlene.
Kia ora, Marlene. Really appreciate that. I know it will come from the heart, and it's a lovely way of starting off our hearings every day, and a really good thing to do. So we have, I think, 4 submitters this morning, and we're starting with the New Zealand pork industry team. And if you'd just like to introduce yourselves, probably before we do, I'll introduce myself. Don't think we've heard from you before in the hearings, is that right?
No, that's right.
No. Okay, so look, I'm Stephen Daish. I'm the hearings panel chair, and I'll let Kit introduce himself.
Good morning, everyone. Mr. Hodgson, good to see you again.
Good, John. Hello.
Very good.
Yes. So look, I think just because you haven't been on before, I'll just do a little bit of an introduction in terms of what we're doing. There are four independent hearings commissioners appointed by New Plymouth District Council to make recommendations on the district plan review matters. We tend to split into groups. 2 of us as a quorum, and some of the hearings, like strategic directions, we will have all 4 hearing, but others will be 2 and others will be 3. I think you're probably all experienced in hearings, looking at your evidence. There's various plans on the go around the place, Selwyn, Pororua, Central Hawke's Bay, so you'll probably know the routine pretty well about how these things run. And the only other thing to mention is we do have a statement of interests lodged online in terms of any potential conflicts. So we always ask parties to let us know if there are any issues with us being independent in terms of the matters in front of us. So I presume there's not. If there's not, speak up now. If there is, speak up now. If ever, hold your peace, I think is the saying.
No problem. Thank you.
Yeah, great. Thank you. So look, we'll just get on with your submission. We've got the evidence. We've read it. We do ask participants just to give us a brief highlights package verbally of what they really want us to focus on, and then we'll go to questions. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Commissioner. And yeah, good morning, everybody. And thank you, Marlene, for the karakia this morning. It was great. No, you're right, Stephen. We've not appeared in terms of New Zealand pork. We've not appeared at the hearings for the proposed New Plymouth District Plan as yet. We've certainly been, I guess, keeping an eye across proceedings. New Zealand pork had submissions across topics that have been previously heard, but we've been very comfortable with the progression of the plan and generally with the proposed plan as notified. And we thank the council really for their hard work with the proposed plan. So yeah, the rural zone topic is obviously is our first hearing, and it's one where I guess we're just seeking clarity, I suppose, trying to assist the panel, trying to assist the council with clarity in regards to pig farming activities to ensure we've got a sound regulatory framework moving forward. And that that submission of New Zealand pork and our response has largely been informed by quite a lot of experience that we've gained, certainly quite recently. There's a number of plan changes on the go, and various plans around the country have various definitions and regulatory regimes in place for various pig farming activities. So we've used the opportunities that have been coming up and at regional plans as well.
You're frozen there, and you're not. Yeah, there you go. You're back again. I think we captured that. But
My
your audio was
apologies.
on
Do
off.
I have a Is it okay if I switch my video off? Maybe that might improve the signal.
Yes, that would be fine. Yes,
Okay, let's try that.
you're in the back blocks of
So yeah,
Maui or somewhere advanced, are you, or Waiuku? I read, I think.
I'm in. Yes, apologies. I'm out well west of South Auckland, North Waikato, and we do have a little bit of dodgy signal. It looks like.
Yeah, that's good.
We'll
think
push
you're
on.
clear
Hopefully
now.
that's- Okay, great. Look, I'm here today with two witnesses for New Zealand Pork. We have Penny Cairns, who is the environmental advisor for New Zealand Pork, and Ian Bath, who is the technical manager for New Zealand Pork, and Ian has significant experience with the pig farming sector. And both Penny and Ian would like to just highlight some key points from their evidence statements. So I'll pass on to Penny first, and then after Ian's finished, we can get into the planning evidence and questions.
Great. Thank you, Vance, and welcome, Penny. Great to see you. Where are you? Where are you beaming in from?
Christchurch.
Christchurch, lovely Christchurch. Yes. Thank you. We'll let you give us your highlights.
Just really want to emphasise that while pork is small in terms of New Zealand agricultural industry, it's important. We're focused on the domestic market with very little exporting, and we're very integrated into the local agricultural communities. And while we're well spread out and don't have a huge amount of farmers in the New Plymouth district at the moment, we still need to be sure that there is the ability for new players to move in.
Great. Did you have anything else you'd like to highlight?
No, I think it's all been covered in the submission, but if there's any questions you have for me, then happy to try and answer them.
How many members do you have in Taranaki as a whole and New Plymouth district? Do you have a handle on that?
In the New Plymouth district, we have half a dozen large commercial operators. There are smaller, more independent operators that might be just doing a few pigs, but yeah, the big ones we know and communicate with, and we know there's 5 of them at least.
Okay, thank you. And the geographic, are they mainly in and around New Plymouth, or are they spread out?
There's a couple in New Plymouth, but there's a couple in Stratford and a couple in South Taranaki as well.
Oh, okay, so that's across Taranaki as a whole. There's 3 councils, of course, so maybe a couple in New Plymouth district. Is that what we're hearing? Yes, all right.
But they're important to us.
Yes, of course. Yes, thank you. Kit, did you have any questions?
I didn't. Yep, I'm on mute. No, I didn't. For Penelope, that was all very clear. Quite interesting. I've never had an insight into the pork industry before, so I much appreciated that. And Ian's evidence. I got a couple of questions about him, so that was all very clear. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Right, do you want to move on to me? Yes, Ian.
Yes, please, Ian, and welcome to our hearing.
Yep, thank you. Yeah, so as you can see, I won't go through, repeat the evidence, but I've been involved in the pork industry for a long time. And the evidence provided just really emphasises the wide range of pig farming housing and production systems that we have in New Zealand. And this, the extreme is from indoor to outdoor. So both those systems are very different. And within that, we have a whole range of combinations, I guess. So we can have outdoor sows on the same farm as having indoor growing pigs. And often the pig farms or farming enterprise is linked to other farming enterprises. So it's part of a bigger farming operation. And along with this, of course, with the various systems, the manure management is varied as well. And that goes from liquid systems through to solid systems, from solid bedding systems with straw and sawdust. And the manure management system is directly linked to the housing and production system. They're utilising the nutrients that are produced, so that's either being applied to land via liquid or solid material to, I guess, growing crops, etc. And further down into the evidence, I've sort of given the definitions of these systems and summary of the effects of these systems, as well as the guidelines which the NZ Pork has produced, providing some good practice information. So I guess that's my summary. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Ben?
Pat, we'll move to questions from you.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Barrett. Is that how you pronounce your last name?
I think it's the easiest way is BARF as in laugh. That's how
Okay. Brilliant.
BARF is laugh, yeah.
Look, just I gotta say, I've really appreciated the photographs. I mean, the certainly my experience is as a consumer, I only see pork wrapped up in the supermarket, and so for some reason, you have this image. Well, I have this image that pigs are in big muddy paddocks and they're making a huge mess and all of that sort of stuff. But it was actually really revealing and helpful to see the photographs in your evidence to show that is a perception that's not based on fact, which
very historical.
Yeah, very historical. So it is really interesting to see the current state of the art in terms of pig farming. So I very much appreciated that. A couple of questions. What are the sort of the variables that go to influence the establishment of an indoor farming system for pork versus an outdoor one? If I'm a new entrant into the industry, what are the things that I would take into account to determine which way I go? Do I go into the 55% or do I try the free farm sort of one?
Well, I guess historically, the North Island's been based on indoor, and that's developed over the years, linked directly to the dairy industry, because your image is probably going back to the 60s, where every dairy farm had pigs on them, and they were run in combination with the dairy system to utilise the byproducts from skim milk or whey. And then it sort of subsequently moved to based around a dairy factory. And again, the Taranaki systems that have developed historically have all grown up in association with the dairy industry. So North Island, we have, I guess the farms have been long established, and probably Taranaki region, we're into our third generation, some of those farms with that association with the dairy sector. When we go to if you want, outdoor has developed in the South Island, and that's really been driven by, I guess, a number of factors. Outdoors, arable farms, they've got land, they can add some value by running some pigs on it. So a condition there is obviously the lower rainfall, freer draining soils, running pigs outdoors. So that's part of the package. I guess we wouldn't recommend it running pigs on the side of Mount Taranaki with the high rainfall. and access to straw. And the other one is for bedding. So that's the other component of outdoor pigs, is the availability of straw, and as well as being in a grain growing area. So yeah, Canterbury region, that's where they grow the grain. So that has an effect on the price, where into Taranaki, say we have to import that in from, I guess, South Taranaki or further south in the Manawatu. But that does have one advantage, is you have the port. So one of our farms does utilise that in importing grain from South Australia direct to New Plymouth Port. So that does give them, yeah, an advantage in certain times when the local grain price is short or at a high price.
Okay. If in terms of being able to brand as free range, are there specific industry requirements in terms of how you must farm the flesh, or is it up to anyone to just put the brand on their packets?
Well, we have definitions, what we call free range, which means that the sows, the breeding herds outdoors, and those pigs are weaned outdoors, so they're still running around the paddocks. And then once those piglets are weaned, then they are farmed outside in paddocks. So that's what we call free range. We do have another system where there's a combination, which is the free farm, where the sows are outdoors. So they run outdoors, the breeding herd's outdoors. But once the pigs are weaned, they come indoors into usually into a sort of a bedded system on straw or sawdust. And that's the definition of a free farm. So there's kind of two labels you like to see out there: free farmed or free range. So, but there are industry guidelines on those descriptors.
Okay.
But of course, the commercial NZ Pork has doesn't own any products, so we can't actually, yeah, I guess, well, we don't own it, so we can't brand it as such. We like to be able to say that's New Zealand grown or New Zealand produced pork, and that's what we've just been through a country of origin labelling. But it's a commercial activity, so that the commercial operators have to be able to justify their claims on how their product's produced.
Okay, well, that's really helpful. Hey, your image 7 with the little movable farrowing huts, how do you move those around? How do the farmers move them? Do they just tow them with the tractor, or do they have to lift them up? Or
yeah, either or. Some of them are on skids, they're towed. Others will have hooks on them with forks, which they'll just drive in with the front end loader and just pick them up and move them. So they're moved each farrowing. So and that's for health reasons, that those sows are going on to new soil. And that's the other issue about the dry sows as well. They'll have bigger huts, if we like to call them that. But one of the, I guess, the provisos around the dimensions of those, they're actually big enough to fit through a gate. So that's kind of fixed when you're shifting them, they need to be able to be moved from paddock to paddock. So
these huts, they're open to the ground inside? They
can be open, or they can have floors. That's, you see them, they'll have a lot of straw. Now you can see in image 7 there. Either side of that hut there is some brown material, that's straw. So that'll have about 300 millimeters. That's about a foot of straw in that, and that's replenished. So that's where the piglets sleep, in that straw system.
Okay.
And that's usually open to the ground, but they can have floors in them.
Do you find the sow, I mean, I know it might not be you who can answer it. Do you find the sows get territorial to their huts?
Yes, they do. And that's why we select, if we put them into groups, that when they go to farrow, sows want to be on their own. So they will go and find their own hut. So if you put 10 huts in the paddock with 10 sows, they'll each find their own hut. And it does get some younger animals. The first litters may double up, and that causes farmers all sorts of issues. But basically, at farrowing time, the sows want to be isolated on their own. Yeah.
No, so that's really interesting. Paragraph 17 of your evidence, and I just want to query whether there's a typo there. The last sentence you said less than 5% of the pig herd is found in free range systems. Is that right? I thought Ms. Cairns had said 55% versus 45%.
Well,
I misunderstood it.
No, the difference is the outdoor versus the free range. So we've got a very small number of pigs that are produced in a free range form. So that's when the pigs,
I see.
the progeny are reared right through to point of sale.
Yep.
Whereas we've got a large number of 45% of the sows are run outdoors. The breeding herd's outdoors, but the pigs are weaned indoors. With the free range system, the weaned pigs are outdoors as well, run in paddocks. So that's the free range definition.
Okay.
So it's a very small market.
All right. And last question, you talked a little bit a bit in your evidence about the effects of outdoor pig farming, and in particular, quite a detailed table in terms of factors that influence odour from pig farming, which I must say was very, very helpful. From your experience, do pig farms need to get an air discharge consent from regional councils?
Yes, they usually do. Yes,
They usually do.
Yep.
Okay, all right.
And they'll have consents required to air discharge to land. Yeah.
So you need a consent. What if you're going to take the manure from your livestock and spread it back onto the paddock?
Spread it on the paddocks. Yeah. Yes.
Okay. All right. No, that's good. Thanks. Thanks for that. That's very helpful.
Great, thank you. Yeah, look, I guess I'll just
before you roll on, Vance, I've got some questions. Yes, you've answered a few of these. I was particularly interested in the origins of the industry in Taranaki. Sort of well aware of the connectivity in the old days between the dairy factories in every town and use of whey, for example, to grow pigs. But of course, I think most of that whey now is just sucked into the dairy industry and not really available as a food. Is that right?
Yeah, pretty much. There's product available occasionally. We do get some byproducts from the dairy sector coming, whether it's cheese or whatever, which is processed, gone wrong, or past its use by date, for example. We do have some of that byproduct feeding available, so that can be utilised by pigs, and it certainly is. But as you say, I mean, the dairy industry certainly processes all the products from milk. And certainly not like the old days.
Yes, and just in terms of specialist inputs, I've got a friend of a friend who has a business that produces bedding material from all sorts of sources for all sorts of animals, chickens and everything, and they bring this specialist material in. Is that a feature of your industry as well, or is it pretty much just finding bales of straw and using the bedding that way?
Well, it's we use bedding for a number of purposes. One of them is for when sows farrow, so when the piglets are born, to have some sort of bedding for insulation, keep them off the ground, keep them warm, and then. The other systems, we use a lot of sawdust as well. So sawdust used for bedding, and that's when the pigs are growing on that for the whole time. So it becomes kind of a composting type system. So the pigs are on the sawdust, the manure goes into it, and the pigs, obviously root round it and then mix it all up. So that becomes quite an active system. Probably depend on price. So if the business has a cheap source of product, I mean, it'll be driven by basic price, utilised for piglets indoors. There's some new welfare regulations coming out where we'll need to have manipulable material indoors. So we will be on the lookout for other sort of material. Now, assuming this is sort of organic material, which will
Mm.
break down, can be utilised by pigs. I mean, they eat quite a lot of this stuff.
Mm.
And the other thing is we've got to consider when we start adding bedding material indoors is can the manure management system handle it? So it needs to be able to go down through pipes, through pumps, etc., and out to the where it's applied to land. So
Yep.
yeah, a number of considerations.
Mm.
But the volumes can be quite large if it's bedding, but again, that'll be driven by cost.
Sure, but obviously there's a quality issue as well, particularly if you can't just throw any old thing in there and hope it's going to work. So is that your evidence?
Well, yeah, no, you can't. And also there's a health issue as well. So some of the farms, when we're say using straw, for example, we need to know where that's come from. We can't get straw off paddocks that have had pigs on it and shift that to another farm because there is a biosecurity issue with potential disease and spread. So yeah, certainly there'll be some aspects we'd have to look at around the quality of the product and then the volumes required.
Ian, I just wanted to ask a couple of questions around your role as an expert. You're clearly an expert by qualification and experience. Are you actually an employee of the NZ Pork?
Yes, I am a direct employee of NZ Pork.
Okay.
As of 1st of October this year, I've been, prior to that, I was based at Massey University.
Okay. Yeah, it's just I noticed you haven't signed or signed up to the code of conduct for expert witnesses, and quite often industry employees don't do that because you're not strictly impartial, but we hear your evidence as an industry expert rather than an independent expert. And I don't think we've got a contested situation here with expertise, but I just wanted to check, were you aware of the code of conduct and had you thought through those issues?
Well, I'd signed a previous hearings. I've signed a document around the around those issues, I think.
Yes, Vance, could you help
Yes,
at all?
I can help Stephen there. Ian was most recently a witness for New Zealand Pork in the Otago Regional Plan Change 7 hearings on effluent disposal systems. So Ian had previously, as he said, signed or acknowledged the code of conduct, but that would be our remiss if we've not done that in Ian's evidence here. So yes, certainly as Ian said, he's now an employee of New Zealand Pork, and I think this is the first hearing we've been through, Ian, where that's been the case. Prior to that, you were with Massey University.
Yes, that's correct. Yep.
So I see you're both from Massey then, so it's a great university, that one. Julie's nodding her head as well. Others would maybe have some other opinions. So yes, I think just for the future reference from a process point of view, as an industry employee, it's probably not appropriate for Ian to sign the code of conduct because he's not independent, but his evidence is still very valuable as industry evidence. So it's just something that we keep an eye on, particularly if we in a contest with expertise, which I don't think we are in this case. I know we're not. Is there something to clarify? We'll move on. Just following up from Kit's comment about the photographs, Ian, and this is an expert question. Could you have found some photographs in New Zealand pig farms that would show quite a different situation in terms of just the hygiene, cleanliness? We're seeing like an idyllic looking series of photographs. Are there still farms that you could go to that would find quite a different scene, particularly in
well, potentially. I mean, there might be one. I mean, yeah, there's always going to be a small percentage who are not up to what we'd find. But Again, we've found that over the years that unless the farmers are operating a good practice, doing a good job, they're not going to survive in terms of productivity. There's some standards around the supply, so there'll be some specifications. There is a pig care audit undertaken each year. So again, that's part of the audit, the welfare. There is facilities and kind of housekeeping as part of that audit as well. So those farms are checked and to ensure they are of a standard. Of course, we don't like to defend things on the TV3 news at 7 o'clock. So, and some of the things we have historically seen, you can't defend, but also some of those photos you see in the media are historical. So they go back, 20 or 30 years. Some of those pictures we see routinely put on the media are very old photos and clips.
Are the audits run by MAF in terms of, are they the MAF quality audits, or are they under some other system?
They're under, I think it's, just forget them. Sure Quality was doing it. It's independent. It's an independent audit system. Yeah.
So they're required, each farmer required to do that by regulation?
No, they don't have to, but it may be a condition of supply. So most of the wholesalers are buying those pigs will specify that you need to have a current a pig care audit, and you're producing to a certain standard. And that can be, if they're not current, then their price can be discounted. Those pigs will still probably find a home somewhere, but they won't be at the normal pricing level. So there is it's quite there's an economic driver to ensure that there is a standard met, because again, the processors don't want to be defending an undefendable system, if you like, in the media.
Okay, thank you for that.
So it's a very powerful tool.
Yes. Just about your guidelines you outline on page 7 of your evidence, Ian. Are they, again, I'm just trying to work out, these are voluntary industry guidelines, aren't they?
The good management ones.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Are any of these tied into regional plans in terms of, I'm very, very aware that I'm from Hawke's Bay, so regional plan here does tie in the use of good farming practice based around industry guidelines. Are these guidelines, in your knowledge or experience, sort of tied in anywhere in any regional plans or district plans around the country?
Certainly in some areas, a good management practice outdoors for Canterbury is in place. Sorry, I've got distraction. Yes, and there will be requirements in the resource consent, and there may be some stipulations following those sort of guidelines in terms of application rates of manure nutrients to a certain level, timing of applications, and also things like the use of overseer as a tool to utilise the nutrient loadings.
So are you familiar with the overseer tool?
Yes.
As an expert?
Yes.
Yes. It's had quite a lot of wobbles around it lately, hasn't it?
Yes.
In your experience, is that predictive tool robust for your industry?
Well, we use it through, we go through the organic, I think it's organic manure part of it. So we've only looked at that in terms of making sure that the input data that goes into it is correct. So ensuring that the material that farmers are applying, that they are using tested, like their own product tested, because as the various processes of the manure management system, there is quite a fall off in the nitrogen loading, for example, in various processes. So rather than use a book value as to what comes out of the pig, we suggest that farmers test the product that they're applying and then use those figures in the overseer tool. But in terms of the how should I put it, the other issues, yeah, I'm not familiar. I'm just making sure that that our farmers are inputting the correct data for the overseer to utilise.
So these are regional council issues, so discharges to land, discharges to water, those sort of issues. So we're not really dealing with those in the district plan. I'm just seeing how the industry's just more out of interest, because we are looking at integrated management, obviously, but it's not a topic which the district plan will deal with. Just one last question, Ian, in relation to your table 1, which, like Commissioner Littlejohn, Kat, I thought was pretty useful. Is that your summary, or does that come from another source?
The table 1 or figure 1?
Table 1.
Table. Yeah, I think that's from me. Yeah.
No, it's so it's not. It's your, based on your experience and knowledge of the industry.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes. All right. Thank you. Thank you for your assistance, and we'll now move to Vance for you to take us through your evidence.
Sure, thank you. And let me know if that signal starts to play up again, and I'll turn my camera off. Hopefully, it all goes well.
You're okay at the moment?
Great, excellent. So yeah, I guess sort of wrapping up, as Ian has outlined, it's a very complicated farming system, as pig farming, with the various sort of indoor and outdoor and free range type components to it. And from a planning perspective, that makes things pretty difficult to try and categorise and define the range of activities and relate that back to, obviously, an effects management regime and a suitable regulatory regime. And what I've put up in terms of my evidence is not a suggestion or a challenge to the regulatory regime that the council have proposed in the plan in terms of the activity status for intensive farming. It's just to try and get some clarity, and as I started with today, some consistency really around the country around how we are defining these types of activities. And I guess we're hoping that we might see that roll out in the various district and regional reviews, and we've seen that certainly in other plans. That I guess the genesis for this sort of approach really was out of Canterbury, which is the sort of heartland pig farming activity, with good learnings in terms of farming activities and their effects, and how plans might be better structured to manage those activities. We've had the National Planning Standards of 2019 provide us with a definition for intensive indoor primary production, which has proved very helpful. Although I know at the time New Zealand Pork were suggesting to the ministry that intensive activity doesn't just occur in an indoor situation. There is an outdoor intensive activity that can happen as well, and that's not covered by the National Planning Standard definition, which refers only to those activities principally occurring within buildings. But as Ian has said, you can get an intensity of activity in an outdoor situation that we've acknowledged should be managed under the same regulatory framework as the indoor intensive activity. So my suggestion is a definition that we've essentially uploaded from the Canterbury situations that define an intensive outdoor pig farming activity, as well as the intensive indoor primary production activity. just to make that clear, hopefully for consistent plan interpretation and administration into the future. And then in addition to that intensive activity, there is the extensive pig farming, and we've got various terms for it. We've heard Ian refer to the free range situation. The officers are suggesting in the 42A report that we call that outdoor pig farming. Again, I've uplifted a definition of extensive pig farming from the Canterbury situation, and have suggested that that be applied to this plan as well. And really that's it. The other issue that I've included in my evidence was in regard to the submission of New Zealand Pork concerning mobile pig shelters. And as Ian has identified in his evidence and described, there are a range of shelters that occur. They're a necessity in terms of animal welfare and husbandry requirements, and an integral part of that farming system. And we've got a proposed plan here that has a 250 square metre maximum building coverage limitation for buildings that are not residential in the rural environment. And that to me is quite a significant control. 250 square metres when we talk about typical farming activities and farm buildings, farm sheds, it's not hard to get up to 250 square metres. And certainly if we've got an an extensive pig farming activity that's got 5 to 10 of these mobile pig shelters, as well as their other farm buildings, we're pretty quickly into a resource consent requirement for a coverage breach. So yeah, and again, the suggestion that I've provided there has been uplifted from the Selwyn situation. It's a proposal from the Selwyn Section 42A report writer to deal with the same issue that New Zealand Pork has raised in that district. And with that, I'm happy to go to questions.
Thank you very much, Vance. Kit, do you have some questions?
Yeah, I do. There's always a point where you like to think that the way in which all the definitions in a plan work together are all going to work themselves out, and you don't actually need to get on top of them. But I fear that's not the case here. So I'm standing at the brink of doing a deep dive into all of these definitions and seeing how they all interrelate. Because and I'm grateful that you've already sort of had a little bit of a think about that for us, Vance. I guess my first question is, in an ideal world, well, in your experience for the Taranaki region, do new pig farmers need to principally get a resource consent from the regional council?
That's correct. I haven't got the plan open in front of me, but from memory, a new intensive pig farming activity is a restricted discretionary activity under the AIR plan.
Okay, under the AIR plan, but
Correct.
Not under the regional land plan?
I couldn't tell you, to be honest. No,
okay. Oh, look,
I've not been involved in any of the water-related regional planning processes in Taranaki, right. So I'm not sure. Certainly in terms of the AIR plan.
Are you familiar though? Well, are you aware of whether any new farms in the current New Plymouth district would require a land use consent from the district council, or is it the case that the land use itself is effectively permitted if it's conducted in the rural zone, and they just might need a regional consent?
Under the operative plan?
Yeah.
I understood it needed resource consent. I would need to check, but I understood it needed a land use consent.
But from the industry's point of view, the ideal outcome would be for the ability to establish a pig farm without having to get a land use consent from the district council, because you comply with the various rural zone provisions. So you might only just need to go and get an air discharge permit. That would be the ideal position, wouldn't it?
It would be, and there are other plans around the country that have adopted that approach. Selwyn and Huranui are examples. In terms of the proposed plan, our submission is not to seek that outcome. Certainly in terms of the extensive pig farming, which we see as just being similar in nature and effect to any other outdoor farming activity. But in terms of the intensive component of pig farming, no, we've accepted a restricted discretionary activity as proposed.
Okay.
I mean, the issue with the consent, I mean, there's it's a really interesting scenario, and it's one that I've been through with growers for Horticulture New Zealand. There's a lot of security that a land use consent provides a farmer, because things change, plans change, everything changes. And so, having a consent banks that activity, gives them security for a number of reasons. And so, I mean, there's a lot of convincing to be done to convince all farmers that that is the case. But as I see it, there is an advantage in some situations to have a land use consent in place for your activity.
Okay. Can I take you to Appendix A in your evidence? It's here. I just want to drill down to a couple of questions. I've got to say, it's the first time I've heard the use in the description of farming as extensive, as a, I guess, a counterpoint to intensive in a way, isn't it? Is that how you're intending it to be used? So intensive is when you effectively artificially constrain the stocking rate by confining animals within a smaller area, whereas extensive is you give them a much bigger range and they can wander around by themselves.
That's right,
okay?
Absolutely, and a definition that we've pulled from the Canterbury Air Plan,
Okay,
which has both that intensive and that extensive. Yeah.
in terms of your nesting table there, and because I think you actually acknowledge in your evidence that to the extent that it's extensive, it's no different from any other sort of livestock use outdoors. So if indeed we've already got within our nesting table agricultural, pastoral / livestock farming, doesn't that cover your extensive pig farming anyway? Why do we need a separate and distinct thing for extensive pig farming? Is there something about it that differentiates it from other livestock farming in this way?
No, only in terms of the only in terms of having a definition that links back to that vegetation cover standard, really, in the definition. That it provides, I think, assistance for planners for the future, for that plan administration, and clarity that we're talking about here an activity that, by its very nature, sure, it's outdoors, but it is at such an intensity that vegetation cover can't be maintained because of the stocking rates or the stocking practice. And with that comes a range of effects, be it odour or dust or even freshwater quality effects as well. So, I certainly take the point that we're saying that this is just farming, extensive pig farming. It's outdoor farming of animals, as is the same with other stock, be it cattle or deer or sheep or whatever. But for pigs, it's a little bit different. And we could live in a plan, I suppose, without that definition. But my suggestion is that we might have some assistance for the future if we've got that definition.
I mean, it's an interesting. Well, it's actually a very helpful concept to know that you see the difference between extensive and intensive being whether or not the stocking rate enables vegetative cover to be maintained on the pasture. Is that something that you would apply to all forms of livestock farming? Because presumably there's nothing, at what point does the stocking rate for cattle or for deer, for example, get to a point where vegetation cover can't be maintained and it suddenly becomes intensive? I mean, it's probably going off piste a little bit, but it's an interesting exercise to think it through.
Absolutely, it's outside of my expertise, but certainly it is a good point, and all of those animals have different behavioural characteristics as well. So won't necessarily. I assume that cattle aren't going to root up the ground the same way that a pig would in an outdoor situation.
I suppose one of the distinguishing features, I guess, is that those other sorts of ruminants actually eat the vegetative cover, and so to have a standard that says there has to be maintained might defeat the purpose. Whereas I understood pigs are generally grain fed, or would they eat pasture species as well?
Ian could probably answer this better than I can, but my understanding is that certainly in an outdoor situation, they will graze on the grass. Yeah. As well as being supplemented by feed.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes, they do graze. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, that's interesting. Okay. Last one then. In terms of your change to the rule R12, just I can't get it, but that's probably because I'm a lawyer. What is the implication of removing the word indoor from that rule? Because I look, and again, I must say I'm quite. It's a question I'll probably talk staff about in the final hearing.
Yeah.
We've got two definitions in this plan.
Yeah.
We've got intensive indoor primary production, which is the national planning standards definition. And then we've got intensive primary production, which is exactly the same thing.
That's right. No, look, my apologies. That's an error. Probably a hangover from myself and evidence that I put together on the same day. But it depends on the construct of the plan. Some plans will have an overriding intensive primary production definition. And then under that, in the nesting table, will be sub-definitions that cover, in this case, it might be intensive indoor primary production and consistent with the National Planning Standard definition, and intensive outdoor primary production. And there might be others that sit under that umbrella term of intensive primary production. The mushrooms, for example, might be another. So my apologies, that's misleading. It would depend on the construct of the plan and how the decision is made on how we accommodate this intensive indoor and intensive outdoor primary production activity as to whether you need that overarching term. You know, the objectives and policies, would need to refer to the right terms. If they're talking, to an intensive primary production term, that's fine. But if they're talking to something else, then there would need to be consistency. So my apologies, I've put an error in there, and that's misleading.
Yeah, well, the thing is, we'll obviously be interested in why there is a definition for two terms that's exactly the same.
Yeah.
Intensive indoor primary production is the same defined term as intensive primary production. So I guess that's something we can get to later. So if I was making a note on your Appendix A, what would I write next to the crossed out indoor?
I think you would make a note that we would need to check for consistency in the terminology that's applied across the plan.
Okay. Thanks for that. That's what I've written down. That's good. I'll come back to that later. Your nesting table, intensive outdoor primary production pig farming.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think there's any? Why does it need to specifically be for pig farming? Is that are there other forms of intensive outdoor primary production, or are you suggesting they would otherwise be covered by agricultural, pastoral, and horticultural activities?
I am. I'm not. I don't have the knowledge, the experience across those other farming systems to be able to categorise them in terms of that definition. But for pig farming, certainly that regular feed source being substantially provided from an off-site source, and the inability to maintain that ground cover is a very specific reference to the pig farming activity.
Yeah,
but
so you're saying you wouldn't find any other primary production out in the sort of outdoor sense that has exactly the same distinguishing features as the farming of pigs. Any other animals that we've domesticated and farmed, it's that they all have slightly different requirements. Yeah.
That's right. That's my understanding, although, as I say, I'm no expert in any of those other systems.
Yeah. Okay. All right. That's good. That's helpful. Thank you, Mr. Hodson.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kit. Just on that last point, I'm not an expert in dairying, but I do have a reasonable amount of knowledge about some of these other systems. I am aware, and this is something that might need to be thought about, that there is an issue which has been bouncing around the planning fraternity for a few years about intensive dairy feeding on break fenced crops like Chamolia or turnips or Swedes, and the fact that essentially that does turn the ground to mud, and there's an animal welfare issue about dairy cows sort of eating in amongst some pretty wet ground. So that is an issue which the council planners should think about. I'm not sure whether it's a practice in Taranaki so much, but certainly in Southland and other parts of the South Island, it is quite a big planning issue, which largely dealt with those some of the land use rules and regional plans.
That's right. I think, Commissioner, in terms of the freshwater quality issues, and that's an activity now covered by the intensive winter grazing provisions in the National Environmental Standards for Freshwater 2020.
Yes.
The implementation, I think, of which has been delayed or put further down the road. But certainly an issue that I understand is being grappled with at a national level.
Sure. Whether the effects issues extend to land use planning, it seems like to me a lot of this is, I suppose, the whole visibility of animals, being raised in areas that would normally be pasture but are perhaps cropped and used in a different way. So that's probably a bit of a curly one, Denise. Have you come across that at all? Just or Louise?
Yeah, just I suppose my understanding would be, I'll turn my video on, that it is a regional issue, and it's dealt with through those regulations under the NPSFM and the NESF. Just from my experience of working in the regional council, they do part of the riparian sort of work that they do is that every farm has an advisor, and those issues are talked through on the farm. So kind of through a voluntary way, and Dairy NZ also has a lot of voluntary codes. So we don't really see the same issues I haven't heard of it in Taranaki of cows standing in mud, that type of thing. So there also has been in the South Taranaki, sorry, it's going a bit off topic, but the use of herd homes. So that's another way of dealing with that issue, or standing off pads. So, but they aren't. The herd home would probably, because they are quite large, may trigger a land use consent just for the size of them, but they don't tend to. I haven't seen any in this district, so that would be.
Just thinking about the rationale for that definition that Kit was just asking about. It's because you can't maintain pasture or ground cover. That's one of the reasons why you think it's unique. I don't think it is unique in the dairy farming situation always. But the other thing is that regular food sources are brought in from outside, whereas the fodder crops that cows eat and sheep are normally grown on the property and then are break fed out. So yeah, there's just a rationale distinction there, but I'll see with you. Anything else to say about that one, Vance?
No, I've got nothing else I could say to that.
Yep. All right. I did have one question about your paragraph. Paragraph 45, and this goes to the exemption you're looking for the mobile huts. You say that you're not calling any specialist landscape evidence, But you still say without any evidence, the control is onerous. So is that, what's that based on? Is that your own personal experience, or?
That's right. It's my understanding that that the control is in the proposed plan on the basis that there's a landscape issue, that there's a potential significant landscape effect from built elements larger than the 250 square metres. And as per that evidence, we've not called any landscape evidence to deal with that. But my comment is in regards to experience around the country. There are plans that have building coverage limitations in the rural zone. It's not uncommon, but 250 square metres is uncommon. The most recent plan that I've been through where a coverage limitation was put in was the Waikato district, a significant farming district, and has a 500 square metre coverage limitation, which appears more flexible to allow for the typical range of farm buildings that one might expect in a rural production zone, in a rural production environment.
So would there be scope in your evidence to say, look at that 500 rather than an open-ended exemption in the rule?
Absolutely, yeah. No, I think the submission of New Zealand Pork is certainly broad enough for that consideration.
Yes, because in your travel around the other plans in the country, have you heard landscape evidence to the contrary, or like you're giving us a proposition as an expert planner and a topic you're not qualified to give, and the only way I think we could accept your opinion on this would be if you could point us to some evidence.
That's right. No, apologies. I don't.
Particularly, the council was concerned. Yes.
Yes. Yeah. No, I can't point to any particular evidence. No.
Yes, because I think the council does have landscape advice. I'm not sure where the origin of the rule is around landscape, but you're suggesting it is. So we'd have to sort of hear back from the council planners on this one and their right to reply. But the evidence you've given us verbally about the Waikato example is potentially quite useful rather than having an open-ended provision. But then obviously it relates to land area as well, doesn't it? So 250 might be plenty on a 10 hectare block, but if you had 100 hectare very large farm, it wouldn't be very, very much. So
that's right.
The scale of property, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Yes. All right. So look, that's all the questions I think we have. There's nothing else from you?
No, that's good.
No. So Penny, Ian and Vance, I'd like to thank you very much for appearing with us for us today. This is a discrete planning issue, but a very important one for the district, and for thinking ahead in terms of both maintaining existing farming systems and thinking ahead about new pig farms that might seek to establish. We certainly appreciate hearing from the industry representatives and the expertise you have in Vance. Your evidence was written in a particularly friendly way for us. It was very well put together, very clear, and that goes for you too, Ian. So really do thank you for your time, and we'll hear back from the staff on their response and their right to reply. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioners, staff.
All right, so I think we're moving now to Mr. Twigley. Cam, I see you there.
Yes, I am. Morena tātou.
Morena. So we have your evidence, which has got 2 clients. So thank you for providing us that in that form, Cam. We've read that, but again, the routine highlights, and then we'll go to questions. Thanks.
Yeah, so I'll start with my evidence for OMV, and I'll just skim over the key issues and then, yeah, happy to answer questions. So the evidence is really related to an issue that stems from the definitions and the interrelationship between those three key definitions: mining, primary production, and rural industry. And I just think that it creates a misalignment there in terms of how those definitions then filter through to the objectives and policies in the rural production zone. And then we've obviously got the energy chapter that has a relationship with the rural production zone chapter, and I think the section 42A report talked about not wanting to create duplication between the energy chapter and the rural production zone chapter, but I think the issue for me is that it creates a sort of a misalignment between those two chapters. Yeah, if I look at, for example, if I look at objective 4 in the rural production zone chapter, it talks about the planned character and amenity of the zone being maintained, and then it goes on to say, you know, which includes interspersed existing rural industry facilities, which then includes energy activities. So for me, that's saying that energy activities are a rural industry facility and are a, you know, a key sort of activity that's anticipated in the zone. But then when you look at the definitions, energy activities don't sort of fall into rural industry definitions or primary production definitions, and it just creates a gap there. So that was something that I'd picked up, and it's definitely of concern to OMV, given that the rural production zone is one of the key zones that energy activities occur in the district. It's either the rural production zone or it's the major facility zone. Those are the appropriate zones for energy activities to occur in. So yeah, that was really the key issue for OMV. There's one other issue that relates to a new rule around temporary cranes, derricks, drilling masts, which was part of OMV's original submission. And I think the points that I've made there are fairly clear, but I'm happy to answer questions on those as well.
Kit, do you have any question on the OMV evidence?
No, I don't think I did. What it does highlight for me is a need, particularly given the recognition, you know, we're inclined to give to energy activities up in the strategic directions. I think there is a case to be made for ensuring these two chapters, the energy chapter and the rural production chapter, are quite closely aligned. Nothing gives lawyers more pleasure than finding inconsistencies within plans that they can then exploit one way or another. So I think we do need to make sure that we can, there is a clear line of sight between all three chapters that's all saying the same thing. So I appreciate, I agree with you. I don't think it's an issue of duplication. It is an issue of consistency, because we've got to make sure we're sending the same signals, I think, across all of those chapters. So that's helpful. And then the other one, oh no, we're not talking about Todd yet? No,
Not yet, no.
I thought that the Todd stuff, I must say, I didn't have any questions on that. I think it all makes sense in terms of what you're suggesting there, and we just got to work through again the correlation between the two chapters and making sure that we're not missing anything. But no, thanks for that. It was all straightforward.
Thank you, Kit. And Cam, I only have a couple of clarification questions. Your paragraph 25, I've written beside that on my notes, this is the nub of your evidence. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. Yep.
Yes. And as Kit's pointed out, it's helpful. The definitions in and around such a big zone. I think we've heard that it's 97% of the district, and the fact that it's an extensive zone, lots of activities going on. Energy prospecting and production is an absolute feature of New Plymouth District, and it has been recognised and provided for in the strategic directions interim guidance we've provided. So we certainly are looking to staff to make sure that nothing's sort of unavoidably missed out in the intention, just through the discipline of looking at how the definitions work together and how the policies overview relates to the policies carrying on. So your point's well made. You do make a suggestion in 27 that RPROZP6, so policy 6, might be useful to work into, but you don't have a submission, but you haven't suggested any changes there, have you?
No, I mean, I guess I just flagged that, and it was just an observation, and appreciate that there's not potentially scope within the OMV submission on that policy, but I just thought I'd raise it anyway.
Yeah, I think it's actually quite useful to raise those matters for the staff, because even if there's no scope in your submission, they might, you know, in terms of they'll be all over all of the submissions. And yes, but I take your point about scope being important. I did have one final question about your paragraph 30, and this is in relation to gear, drilling rigs being brought up back to sites quite regularly, as I understand it, for workovers of wells and fixing things up. That's quite a common land use activity, isn't it? It's not only the drilling of the well, but the maintenance and makeover by bringing rigs and other cranes and I'm thinking about coiling rigs and all sorts of things that come back and work over wells. Is that right?
Yes, no, that's right. That's a very common activity. To do maintenance on a existing well, you need to bring in a rig.
Yes.
And that could be for things like cleaning sand out of the well, or repairing well casing, those types of general maintenance activities. You need to actually bring a rig to site to do that. It's not doing further drilling as such, but it's just maintaining that infrastructure.
Yes, and do you think that 6-month time frame is about right, given your experience?
Yeah, I think so. Given that, there's a bit of variation really in terms of different wells. Like deeper wells, it takes longer for a rig to get down and do the work that it needs to do. Some of the wells in Taranaki are up to about 5,000 meters deep, whereas some of the shallower ones are closer to 2,000 meters deep. So.
All right. So thank you for those answers. And like Commissioner Littlejohn, I don't have any questions on your TOD generation evidence as well. Thanks for appearing and your evidence. It seems like just reading between the lines, you're having a pretty busy time of it with getting all these evidence deadlines met, and we're trying to be as flexible as possible because it's a busy time for all sorts of reasons. And appreciate your appearance and your assistance, Cam. Thank you.
Thank you, and I do appreciate the flexibility around deadlines and things like that over the last few weeks. It's been an extremely challenging time, so very much appreciated. Yes,
you're not the only one in this situation. We're working pretty hard to keep the team sort of going and all together, because it's unusual times, obviously, and busy times. So thank you, Cam. We'll now move to the airport. Mr. Edwards.
Morena all. And yeah, just sharing those sentiments, I guess, about the flexibility. So I know, yeah, we've been dealing with a few similar issues, broader issues outside of this process. So again, you know, a big thank you for that flexibility in what are interesting times. So what I might do is just start off with a high level summary of my evidence, and I might just double check at this point if you have received the supplementary evidence that, and again, apologies that it was sent through very early this morning, whether you've received that or not. But I can, it means nothing significant in there in terms of what I'm seeking. But I can maybe just sort of talk through that as I'm providing the summary.
Yes, I think I've got a couple of questions about that. The first thing is it's mainly around the actual land area that the council's purchased and its relationship is different to what's shown in your original evidence.
Correct, yes.
Yes. Is there any of the parties involved that would be prejudiced, do you think, by this late supplementary evidence?
I don't think prejudiced, to be honest, Commissioner, in that you know, anything that's being sought is consistent with what is being sought anyway, regardless of the owner of that land. So I my view is that no, yeah, I don't think so.
All right. Look, I'm happy, and I wonder whether Denise or Louise, you can think of any issues with, because normally the evidence is a deadline. Other parties who are interested would have a chance to have a good look at that and speak to us on the basis of what they've read. So Denise, what are your thoughts, and Louise?
I agree with Mr. Edwards. I don't think there's anyone that's been prejudiced. The submitters, the further submitters, were on the other side of the road, so they weren't. They were submitting about the effects of the rule on their property, and as I understand, Mr. Edwards just explained that he still intends to carry through that line of argument. So it's really just around affects that piece of land that the council has bought that both me and Mr. Edwards were unaware of the purchase. So
okay, we heard about it on our site visit with Hearing 14, which was with the our mana whenua cultural experts, that something had been done or was on the wind or had been done. So it's good to have that clarified and the exact area identified. So on that basis, I'm happy to accept. Kathy, you presumably okay with that as well?
Yeah, I mean, it's really just ensuring we've got the most up-to-date information, really. I don't think, I don't think it's evidence that's additional or in support of what the airport is seeking. It's really just making sure we're all working with the most up-to-date thing. I mean, so I don't have an issue with it in terms of it coming in late. No.
Yeah, no, that's great. So just for the benefit of the hearing, how do you pronounce your first name? It's a lovely Welsh name, isn't it?
Yeah, Howell.
Howell.
Yeah, the way I describe it is think of a wolf, Howl. And it should stick, but yeah, I've said that a few times.
Yeah, I think you have.
not in this forum, but yeah.
Yeah. I'm someone that had to spell out my surname quite often. So yeah, it's a beautiful language, the Welsh. So yeah, just understanding how to pronounce things is important. So yeah, so when you get to your supplementaries, if you could share it, Julie, just. Not necessarily now, but when we get to it, just so that the hearing you can talk through that, because many others might not have seen what you're saying. So that's the way to deal with that. But just kick off with your main evidence and summarise that, and then go to that evidence, and then we'll ask some questions.
Yep. Thank you. So I guess the highlights being that firstly, the whole sort of strategic approach of the airport. And I've talked, and the airport has certainly talked about this sort of master plan in the or to be commissioned. So the board now, or the airport board, has confirmed that that is to be commissioned, and you know, I know a provider of that service is being talked with at the moment, so it is underway. Part of that process as well will be a comprehensive RMA review in terms of the framework and some of the mechanisms and processes that will need to be put in place to achieve the longer term outcomes that the airport is seeking. And obviously part of that is any future realignment of the runway. So that will be part of that consideration, but acknowledging that's, you know, a future process and separate process to what we're talking about now, but good context, I think. I think also important to recognise the purchase of that additional land. And Julie, what I might do is just maybe share my screen if it might be easier just to work through that. And if someone could confirm that they can see that. Great, thank you. So this essentially is the additional land. And I'm not sure, hopefully you can see my cursor, but it's hatched with the white and black area. And my understanding is that this was approved by the mayor and councillors late last year, but was confirmed or approved in a closed council meeting. So it wasn't sort of openly talked about, and I obviously only recently became aware of it, as have the reporting officers as well. But I think the the importance of it is well, there's a number of reasons why it is sort of strategically important. Firstly, there is this issue of the realigned runway, and you know, the evidence before in hearing stream 4 from the airport in the options assessment that they undertook was that a realignment of the runway was the only really viable option, certainly in an RMA context at least, to provide for that additional length. So that went through a sort of optioneering exercise with, you know, Puketapu, Hapu were at the table at that process, and that was identified as the only or the preferred option, or an option without an RMA kind of fatal flaw. So yeah, really important to note that realignment could be accommodated physically, at least within that realigned, the additional land in addition to the existing site at the moment. There is another broader reason why it's strategically important, and my understanding is, and I'm not over the detail of this, is that it does secure longer term access to Puketapu Pa for the Hapu. Certainly with you know, this potential realignment of the runway, but also the coastal walkway extension, which is advancing as well. So it's all kind of tied into that, and I think, you know, the press release that I've seen from council identifies those two issues as you know, strategic reasons of why this land has been purchased. So strategically very, very important. What I might do.
Well, can I just ask a question about that? So it may have been written in your evidence, but this land was purchased from what landowner? You know?
It was a person, an individual owner by the name of Mary Weston, as I understand it. Yeah.
It wasn't the Airport Farm Trust.
No.
No, there's a different landowner.
I believe so, yeah.
Yes.
I can confirm that for you, Mr. Chair. Yeah.
Could you please, because we did have a late submission waiver request from Airport Farm Trust on 30th of April 2021, which we had to make a determination on. So I just wanted to fully understand the law of the land. Maybe if you could just clarify for us through Julie, perhaps the landowner, and I'd be just interested to know the the land owned by Airport Farm Trust. Their waiver wasn't granted, but it really does help us with the geography. Thank you.
I think probably another point to note there is it is the council actually that's purchased it, not the
Purchased it.
airport company. So
Understand
that's
that.
yeah. But we can yeah, I'll confirm
But-
that.
But the council owns the airport company, doesn't it?
Indeed. Yeah.
Mm.
Yep.
Thank you.
So yeah, sorry. So as I sort of work through this supplementary evidence, I might just skip to what the implications of this additional land is in terms of some of the noise contours. So this is attachment 1 of my supplementary evidence. And what this shows is the realignment of the runway option. And hopefully you can see that we've got this additional purchased land here, but with the realignment realigned runway rather, the contours obviously pivot, and I should say these are very indicative contours, so there's no detailed work undertaken, it's just the existing contours realigned, if that makes sense. So they are, you know, indicative only. But what that shows is that you know, we've got a small portion popping out of the newly purchased land of you know, land that's within the 65 dB noise contour, and then obviously we've got the 60 dB contour just popping into part of area Q, but the vast majority, you know, within the rural zone between area Q and the airport. And then obviously more broadly than that, we've got the 55 contour, which obviously is an issue outside of this process. Another point that the airport has made, and skipping on to attachment 2 of my evidence, is this issue of the proposed plan noise contours not being the most up-to-date ones. And I know we've had this discussion, but this just illustrates the difference in those in relation to the land in question, or the additional purchase land. So we just have the hashed line is the 98 contours, or those in the proposed plan, whereas the solid line is the 2015 noise contour that was modelled by Marshall Day. But that's all in the hearing stream 4 evidence. But what I've highlighted there is how that impacts on the newly purchased land.
All right, I think perhaps by good luck rather than management, both Kit and I are sitting on the noise on this hearing, and also the special purpose zone airport hearing, which is coming up on the Thursday, the 17th of March. So these issues are all obviously things are moving along with the airport, and we'll need to think about this airport planning issue in the round. We're writing our recommendation. So thank you very much for the update. And that purchase is very interesting, obviously, to us. It's new information and seems to be a pretty strategic piece of land that the council/airport has purchased.
Yep. Before skipping back to that high-level summary, I'll just come to this figure. That's figure 3 in my primary evidence, but again, just showing the newly purchased land. And this is a copy of the one of the figures in the 42A report. Just identifies some of those rural dwellings or habitable buildings that could be constructed as of right. So in terms of, you know, where I'm getting to with my conclusions is that the issue of people, you know, potentially erecting habitable buildings extends far beyond the additional land that's been purchased.
Yes, thank you.
All right, I'll just stop sharing my screen. Yeah, I guess I'll just turn to maybe the 42A report recommendations, and I guess firstly, before going on to that, you know, a couple of key things framing my sort of opinions and my recommendations. Obviously, the status of the airport is regionally significant infrastructure and has some weighting behind it through the regional policy statement in infrastructure policies 1 and 2, and also the strategic directions. number 21 in the proposed plan. The issue of the contours being slightly out of date, the optioneering for the runway extensions, the master plan being commissioned, and also, looking at the purpose of the rural zone and what really the objectives are driving at, which are about sort of primary production and not rural living, should I say. So with that framework, in terms of the 42A report recommendations, there's three key things. I think firstly, I'll start on the future urban zone point, which also is obviously being considered at the moment. So I see the airport did recommend that a future urban zone adjacent or across the road of Airport Drive to Area Q be thrown out effectively or removed from the plan. The officer rejects that, and look, I agree with the officer in that regard. I think that land is suitably distanced away from the airport and any sort of updated or realigned noise contours, and also a big chunk of that is looking at giving effect to the MPS urban development. So that obviously forms part. Well, that future urban zone forms part of the council's assessments and NANSPI assessments. And look, my view is that I don't see that as a problem in relation to reverse sensitivity effects from the airport. The second key or recommendation is that the airport sought a non-compliant activity for habitable dwellings, I think, or buildings between Area Q and the airport. Where I've landed is I don't think a non-compliant activity status is appropriate, and where I've landed is that I think a restricted discretionary activity status is appropriate in that band. And I think the figure I showed earlier does show there is a real potential for further rural living activities to establish, and I think one of the things on my radar in that regard is if these sensitive activities are enabled as of right, it just does not allow for a consideration of the effects on the airport to be considered. So while there might be provisions, say for example in the airport zone that would allow a broader assessment, if they are permitted, obviously that assessment is not enabled in any way. And also, the evidence I rely on there is obviously from Mr. Peakle, the noise expert for the airport that you heard from in hearing stream 4, where Mr. Peakle was firmly of the view that the 55 dB mark is not a kind of a finite demarcation of where effects may or will be okay. So it's case by case basis, I guess.
Could you take us back to that plan you showed us from the officer's report?
I can indeed.
Just around the subject, because I'm interested in the yellow dots. I think are the potential residences, aren't they?
Hopefully you can see that.
Yes.
Sorry, Commissioner Daish, can I just clarify that?
Yes.
The yellow dots are actually the existing dwellings.
Existing dwellings.
Yeah. What we can best, it was hard to know whether it was a shed or a habitable dwelling, but from our GIS analysis, they're the existing dwellings.
All right.
My apologies, I misunderstood that. I thought they were the potential ones, but as I understand it, there was a comment in the 42A report about, was it approximately 11 new rural dwellings could be established as of right, from memory?
Yeah, it was just looking at the applying standard, FEC standard S5. So it's just an approximate, but obviously because they haven't been established, we didn't know where they would site them on the site. So we hadn't marked them in. So sorry, that's probably my fault. It wasn't very clear.
Thanks for that clarification, and thanks for taking us back. So Denise, is that, while you're there, is that 11? I'm just trying to get the geography of where the 11 potentially or theoretically could go around this plan here.
Yeah, it's 11. It's 11 across those properties, which are between the yellow bit, which is area Q,
Mm,
and then sort of the outline of and then the other future urban development, just the land that's zoned rural production zone between area Q and the future and the fuzz
mm.
zone. Yeah,
The fuzz, is that shown on here?
it's in the, I think it's yeah, it's the
Oh,
grey.
okay, there's a fuzz there. All right. And yeah, we may have had this evidence already, but how those potential 11 additional houses might line up with what might be realistic modelled noise controls for a real line runway. That's sort of the key question, isn't it? Key planning question, I think. Is that right?
I think so. Yep.
Hmm. Is it? Do you actually have a plan that perhaps is either being created that or could be supplied to us that would give us that correlation or that information?
Look, yeah, I mean, we could certainly prepare one along those lines and work with council just to make sure we think it's accurate in terms of what we're illustrating. So we can certainly do that. Yeah.
I think that would be helpful to us, just as we look at the issues for the airport's future planning and in relation to a real line runway and amongst a growing part of the district. Reverse sensitivity issues are significant, or the potential, and we're going to need to do our very best with the tools we have, with the scope of the evidence we have, to make some sound recommendations given what we have in front of us, and that plan would certainly be helpful. So perhaps that's some homework for you, Hal, to work with the council on, and certainly like to have that in the door within a week or so, and before the right of reply, or it even could come in as the right of reply if you're working on it with the right of reply, if you're working on it with the council team, just to make sure it's accurate.
Yep, sure.
Thank you. So back to you.
So that was really the yeah, those have covered the key points. I think the other recommendation I'm making is a reference to, and this is consistent with my subdivision evidence, but a sort of reference in the policy framework of the rural provisions in P7 to the noise contours. So acknowledging that reverse sensitivity effects are not just limited to zone boundaries, as I think it's worded in P7 at the moment, but obviously there's a broader issue with sort of noise control or contour boundaries as well. So yeah, consistent with the subdivision evidence that I prepared, I do recommend a reference to the noise contour boundaries as well as the zone boundaries.
That's the fourth chapter we also common commissioners on, I think. So yes, thank you. Is there anything else you'd like to highlight before we look to Kit for questions?
No, that's this my summary. Yep. But acknowledging as well, this is a bit of a moving feast as things are evolving, as we get to understand them, and acknowledging, Mr. Chair, your comments about the limitations of scope. So that's what we're working with as well on behalf of the airport.
Yeah, I think thanks, Mr. Edwards. That was helpful. I am really encouraged that the council are making steps to future-proof their realignment by property acquisition out there. That that does make ultimate planning solutions a little easier to I guess manage to some extent, because once the council and or the airport owns the land, then it can effectively control what can happen there. But even so, based on your realigned contours, I think it's fairly obvious there is the potential within that area for sensitive activities to occur in the short term. And I'm under no illusion that the task the airport's asking us to do is to give it a hand to try and stop that until it can finish its master planning exercise and get on with promoting formal protection, either through a designation or the like. So look, you've certainly laid down the challenge to us, and it's certainly something Ms. Ongley addressed us on extensively in the noise hearing as well. So and we've got all of that in front of us. I guess the key thing that came out of your submission is the plan that you've attached, which would show the area to which this proposed new rule would apply. And I understand that the rationale for the plan arises from the airport's submission. And it's last row on page 10 of the submission, which simply says rural production zone provisions and subdivision chapter. In order to enable the airport to upgrade and protect it from potential reverse sensitivity, there is a need to protect it from potential subdivision and residential type land uses on the land primary production land between Area Q and the airport. Then the relief says include a non-complying activity status for any subdivision and residential type land use activity on rural production land between Area Q and the airport. And it's those magical words, between Area Q and the airport, because that was the extent of the submission. There was no map attached to it, was there?
No, there wasn't.
No.
Yeah, that's correct.
So I think this is, and I know Ms. Ongley's addressed us on scope previously, but if I remember rightly, that was more with our ability to revise the contours rather than to implement a rule in this location. Is that
Yeah,
right?
I do. Yeah, I believe that was in relation to the 50 dB indicative contour. That was the context for that discussion.
I think look, I mean, it's, you know, again, not wanting to stray outside the bounds of, I guess, the latitude we've got to determine scope being fairly and reasonably raised, and, you know, all of the case law around it. There is and I guess what I'm coming to is I think I would be assisted by some brief submissions from Ms. Ongley on whether now specifically identifying the land in this plan presumably by way of some form of overlay or indication on the rules, whether that's within the scope of the relief sought, which is to identify effectively the land between Area Q and the airport. I think that's the critical issue from my perspective, and I guess to some extent being able to sustain that description becomes harder the further you go to the north. And I mean, your plan's got your blue dotted line right around up to the northern end of the airport, which, you know, arguably is starting to strain the natural meaning of the words between Area Q and the airport. And so I'd just be interested, I think, in a brief scope submission from Ms. Ongley if the airport's able to assist us there, just to look at that.
Yep, absolutely.
I have been involved in cases where a narrative form of relief in a submission was able to be incorporated into a GIS sort of outcome. And that's something that you're obviously asking for here, but again, it would come down to whether we think that this is appropriate and within scope. I must say, I have less of an issue with your proposal that it become restricted discretionary, because ultimately you sought non-complying. And so this is a lesser form of relief. So I don't have as much of an issue with that, but it really comes down to whether you can now translate those quite brief, broad words into a spatial layer on the plan, really. So that's really a legal question more than a planning question, I have to say. But in terms of the overall evidence and the way you've approached the response to the officer's report, I don't have any specific questions. I think it's all very clear. And as I say, Commissioner Daish and I will be wrestling with this for the foreseeable future.
Thank you. Is that all you have, Kit?
Yeah, it is actually. Yeah,
Yeah.
I just want to get a sense
Thank
of
you.
how far that
So-
issue can go.
So look, I think those three matters are going to assist us. Some legal submissions from Sarah Ongley on the scope issue. The other things that plan about the areas which could be developed in terms of housing, new housing, theoretically in relation to the noise contours that would need to be associated with a real line runway. That's a future issue, I know, but that's really for our information. And there was one other matter I asked for at the start. I just lost track of that.
Or was it the owner of the airport farm
Oh, yes.
trust land?
Yes, just so we can look at the geography of the owners. So that's great. I just had one other very minor point on your paragraph 37, Howell, and you suggested additional words to that policy. You've got two ands in a row there, so whether that works from a grammatical, and Commissioner Little John's our grammar police, adjectives and zone and noise contour boundaries. That's not very elegant, is it?
No, I'd agree with that.
So, there's something for the Denise, I think, if you were going to look at that addition, need to have a think about from a wording point of view. So look, that's everything from me. And is there any other summary points you'd like to make, Howell? And we'll otherwise we'll adjourn for a cup of tea.
Yep, nothing further. Thank you.
All right, so let's just have a pit stop. We'll come back at 11 a.m. Thank you.
We're good to go.
Yes, thank you. I can see Graham and Doug. Are you both from the Kaitaki Community Board, or just perhaps introduce yourselves to us?
Ata Mārie, Commissioner Daish, Commissioner Littlejohn, tēnei te mihi ki a kōrua. I'm Graham Chard, I'm the chair of the Kaitaki Community Board, and I'm here with Doug Hislop, the board's immediate past chair, and somebody who's been involved with the proposed district plan process since 2015, and someone who has an intimate knowledge of Wākura's land development and zoning issues over the past 50 years or more. We thank you for the opportunity to address you in support of our written submission. I'm here today speaking on behalf of the Kaitaki Community Board, and also to represent the interests of the myriad of Wākura residents who have engaged with the Kaitaki Community Boards over much of the last 2 decades in relation to opposition to any form of urban zoning, classification of the land south of Wākura, identified as Wākura South, Lot 29 on proposed planning maps. There's a perception that's been expressed in some quarters that those who live in and around Oakura are well-heeled, overly precious, anti-growth obstructionists who stifle progress by being aggressively protective of their village and the area that they live in. Some of those accusations have also been cast the way of the Kaiteki Community Board and its perceived role as community leaders. While there may be the odd few landowners and or residents who may indeed fit that mold, I can assure you that for the vast majority, this is not the case. Although I hold the chair of the Kaiteki Community Board, I'm tangata whenua of Ngā Mahanga a Tairi Hapu, but I don't live in Oakura, I don't own property in the village, and I don't have any vested financial interest in what happens around the village. However, I too am personally opposed to this area of urban zoning as proposed. Opposed due to the lack of visionary logic regarding the current decision, its detrimental effects on social, safety, and well-being amenity of the village, and due to the cultural and environmental risks to nearby ecosystems, habitats, and wahi tapu areas. The principal attraction of people to Oakura is its beaches, its green spaces, such as Shera Reserve and Matakai Park, and its seaside village feel. All of these attractions are on the seaward side of the main highway, and they are primarily family and child-centric amenities. It makes sense, therefore, that the safest residential option for families is to buy and build on that side of the highway. And our written submission highlights that there are sufficient opportunities for future urban development in that area well into the foreseeable future. Living on the seaward side of the state highway provides safe access to these attractions, safe pedestrian pathways to the services within the village CBD, a number of vehicular access onto the busy State Highway 45, and the ability to maintain the village feel of Oakura. A future densely populated urban development south of Oakura results in exactly the opposite of that. When added to the existing rural lifestyle residences in that area, it would create a single entry vehicular bottleneck onto the state highway. It would require families to negotiate a very busy main road to access the amenities that attract residents to Oakura. It would isolate that sector of the community from the rest of the community by council-driven design rather than by resident choice as made by rural lifestylers. And it would undermine the seaside village feel that many desire when they move to Oakura. For we who are of Taranaki Tūturu descent, the Kaiteki Range holds significant cultural importance, both spiritually and from a kaitiakitanga guardianship and protection perspective. As mana whenua, Taranaki Tūturu are opposed to any activity that could adversely impact the delicate ecosystems and habitats on the Kaiteki Range. And this proposal, allowing a densely populated with residential development so close to the boundary of the Kaiteki Range, bush range, is an example of such an activity. Any argument that a future urban zoning should be applied to this area for the long-term provision for urban growth and development is fundamentally flawed, unless there is a belief on the part of planners that the Kaiteki Range will not form part of Taranaki Maunga National Park at some stage in the future, and the Taranaki iwi status as mana whenua over this area will lapse in the future as well. In acknowledgement of the desires of a large percentage of the Oakura community, of Taranaki iwi concerns, and to fulfill our Local Government Act Section 52 obligation to represent and act as an advocate for the interests of our community, the Kaiteki Community Board have submitted in opposition to the proposal for this application of a future urban zoning for the area of land identified as Uakuta South Lot 29. We request that the proposed zoning be replaced with a rural production zoning, a zoning that better reflects the aspirations of the community, one that protects the surrounding character of that area, one that protects the nearby ecosystems and habitats, and one that ensures that future urban development in and around Uakuta occurs in a manner and at locations that enhances the desired character of the village, while providing safe pedestrian and vehicular passages for residents. Ka muti taku kōrero anai, nō reira tēnā kōrua, kia ora mai kōrua. I'll ask Doug Hislop if he's got anything that he'd like to add before I invite any questions that you as commissioners have in relation to our submission. Doug.
Can you hear me?
Mm.
Okay. I'd just like to just flesh out a little bit about my involvement here today. I retired. We had a serious illness in the family, and I retired. I had intended to continue in my role until the next elections, but I had to retire in October. But prior to that, for the years prior to that, I've been working alongside council planners and the community and so on, dealing with the proposed district plan. And I really ended up getting the short straw there because the other members of the community of the Kaiteki Community Board all had full-time jobs. So I sort of ended up with that role. So I just thought I should add that in. The other thing, I think, thanks for your words, Graham, by the way, but I think I should add in also that I'm certainly not a long-term expert or knowledge of planning exercises here or anything. Really, the Kaiteki Community Board became first involved with the Paddocks hearing, which is in 2010. So it's really from then onwards that we've been representing the community in this regard. So I just thought I should add that in. Really, I think perhaps if the commissioners have any questions, I might need to answer. But other than that, I really don't have anything to say.
Thank you, Graham and Doug. We'll hand over to Kit to start any questions he has.
Tēnā koe, Graham. Thank you for that. Very interesting, very helpful evidence. Really, an observation and a question. Firstly, the question. I'm interested in the legal status of the community board, and that's not to be seen as in any way negative. I'm just familiar with the structure in my predominant area of practice in Auckland, where there are a range of local boards, but the local boards are not categorized as persons for the purposes of making submissions, and are restrained from being able to make submissions on planning matters. That's what the situation is in Tamaki, and I'd be interested in getting a little bit of information about what the status is in New Plymouth, as to, in particular, whether the community board is a person that has separate legal identity that's able to make a submission on the proposed plan. And it might be something that Julie can help us out with, and it's really just to make sure I've got the dots connected between the community board and this process, really. Do you have anything you wanted? Is there anything you could enlighten me on there?
My understanding is that we as a board are empowered to act as advocates on behalf of the New Plymouth District Council for our community, and then to feed back through the council organisation the concerns, aspirations, issues, interests that our community, the community within our rohi, bring to our table to be able to take to the council in terms of submissions and supporting and those sort of issues.
All right.
Can I, perhaps I could add to that. I'll just read from the section 52 of the LGA. It says, B, consider and report on all matters referred to it by the Territorial Authority or any matter of interest or concern to the Community Board, and maintain an overview of services provided by the Territorial Authority within the community. So that there's no decision-making powers whatsoever, but I believe we are charged to comment and report to the Territorial Authority as required. Does that make sense?
Yeah, look, and I'm familiar with that provision.
Yes.
My experience with it in Auckland, though, is it's been interpreted as not going so far as to enable a local board to actually act in its own name and make submissions on things. They are very much involved in planning applications and have a great degree of consultation input into draft documents before they are notified, but they don't actually get an ability to go further than that. I mean, because, for example, you could hypothesize that let's say the council did not accept our recommendation and continued the proposed zonings in this location. Would the Community Board then have a right to appeal the council's decision?
Well, Julie might be able to help here. I do believe when it's a representation review or an election, we have the right to appeal. Is that correct, Julie?
I'm in Commissioner Daish's hands whether he'd like me to answer that question or the situation with New Plymouth's community boards.
He's on mute.
Here we go. We'll do it. This is an important question from Commissioner Littlejohn. We will need to know one way or another the status of the community boards, and particularly my experience in hearings is that this is probably the first community board that I've seen make a submission on a council approved document seeking perhaps a different outcome than the council, and it goes to the question of certainly the points that are being made are all valid and reasonable and understandable. It's just really that governance issue that us as holding delegations from New Plymouth District Council need to understand. So Julie, probably go back to you and your judgment about how best we might receive that advice, whether it's through you, you've got a role as a hearing administrator, not as a witness, or through some other, we've got powers to ask for, submissions from the lawyers or on this matter, which might be if you do think that might be useful, let us know.
I'm comfortable to answer. I'm just conscious I'm wearing two hats then. So New Plymouth District Council does allow community boards to make submissions. They are required to approve that submission through a formal meeting process. And I can confirm that Kaitaki Community Board have completed that process, which does allow them to enter into the process. Your point regarding ability to appeal decisions, there is no financial delegation to the community boards that would enable them to procure the necessary expertise to enter into an appeal process.
Just to round that out, there's no appeals don't have to be run by lawyers and planners. They can be run by lay people. So would there be any obstruction for the community board to take an appeal and run it through their own voluntary selves?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. Kat, back to you. I'll just let you carry on.
That's very helpful. That's good. I mean, I didn't want that line of questioning to be seen as somehow a bit negative. I just you've got a different governance structure down in New Plymouth, and now that Julie's the oracle and has shined the light on that, I can understand completely. So and you know, it's great that the board takes this so seriously that it's prepared to come in and really, you know, put this information in front of us. So that's excellent. The second thing I said was an observation, and that as I read the material, this is essentially material that will go to a determination on what the actual colours on the maps will be, and that is a hearing that's not this hearing. That's a hearing that will take place in due course. So there's nothing wrong with you bringing this information to us now. I observed that the owner of some of this land brought information to us yesterday, I think it was, contending to the opposite from what the board's contending. And he got the same message, which is that this is a matter for the rezoning topic, which will happen in due course. So again, it's not a criticism. It's really good for us to know where some of the hot spots are going to be in the contest over zoning. And clearly this is one of them. So it's yeah, appreciate it. But there's probably not a lot that you might see come out of the rural production zone hearing that you would get any form of excitement over. It'll all very much be the contest ultimately in the zoning hearing, as far as I can see. So that's the only other matter I wanted to make an observation about, Steve.
Here we go again. Thank you for that, Kit. I do think your evidence to us in this hearing is particularly important, given that we do have this arrangement where not all of the commissioners are sitting on all the hearings. That's an efficiency aspect, but linking Kit into the knowledge about these issues, he's not sitting on the rezoning hearing, that's Commissioner McMahon and myself, is very, very valuable. And that's why I thought both the evidence we heard yesterday and this provides very important context. I do have a couple of contextual questions. Graham, you mentioned that, I think I heard you right, but you can clarify that. Is there a possibility that the Kaitaki ranges could come into the national park? Or is it already in the national park? Like I'm reasonably familiar, but just update me on that.
Kaitaki Range is already part of the national park, sir?
Yes, yes. Okay. And perhaps, Julie, we could bring up Graham's evidence. And I just wanted to ask a couple of questions about the photo on the first page. So this is an excellent view. Is this taken from a drone or an aircraft, Graham?
It's a drone.
A drone.
Yes.
And is the sea behind us?
This
in the front, the bottom of the photo?
It's to the right.
To the right.
Yes.
Okay. Yes. And the state highway is in the middle of the photo, is that right?
If you see where it says Fuzz South, directly below Fuzz South is an intersection. That's the highway. Got
you. So yes, we have looked at this on our site visits, and yes, the Kaitaki Range in the background there, is that right?
Yes.
Yes. And the Fuzz West area is an area that you're not opposing. Is that an area that the community board is comfortable with?
That's the area that we contend is a more suitable location for future urban development.
Yes.
And it's our contention that with the available infill housing space within the village and that future urban zone west, then there's adequate provision for expansion of the residential development for the years to come for the village.
Mm.
Can I just add too that it provides a natural boundary for future residential development with the highway there on the left, and the furthest line of big trees there, the golf course is on the other side of that. And of course, the more seaside type villas down on the right. So there's a natural boundary to contain that residential development, if you like. Plus the fact, of course, that there's a stub road already put in there by the council to access that particular area.
Okay, so that's a very helpful image, and that those answers are really enlightening. There was another question. I'm looking at your evidence online here, Graham, sorry, on another screen, so that's why I'm looking away. There was a group that you discussed where you had a terms of reference attached as a...
Are you talking about the focus group?
Yes, the focus group. So can you tell me about that?
Perhaps I should talk to that, Graham?
Yep, happy for you to do that.
Okay, so one of this goes back to 2004, really, when we were working through the issues with the coastal strategy, and then the follow-up to that that came out of the coastal strategy was the Oakura structure plan. And the community became quite concerned that very little of the actions were being done in the coastal strategy and structure plan. And so a review was carried out by council, I think it was 2009, but really what they did was they looked at the implementation plan that sat alongside the structure plan and took out all the things that they hadn't done that they had a timeline on. And so as a consequence of that, and with the plan change, 15 and then 27, the community board and the community became quite concerned that no work was really going on. And so we decided that it would be a good idea to set up a focus group of interested and professional locals and start to work with the council towards the fact that the proposed district plan was on the horizon, was coming along. And so that's where it started. And the thing that we set out to do was to put together a terms of reference so that it was pretty clear how that was to work, and it was to be representatives from all the community groups and one thing and another. So that's why that was set up. And it was used to then subsequently, after it had made the Oakura report, then the council thought that was quite a good idea, and Julia probably be able to confirm that, and decided that each of the community boards would have to do a community plan. We couldn't use that, obviously, because that was only applying to Oakura, but we've got a Martin and a Kato in our areas as well. So we developed our community plan along the same lines with focus groups in each of those areas to make our community plan, which has since been reviewed. So all of that work has been done through the community. And what we set out to do really with the first plan from here and subsequent plans was to provide the information to the council planners, not to provide solutions or anything like that, just to say, look, here's the information we've collected. Please consider this when you are putting together the proposed district plan and so on. So that was our purpose of doing it that way.
Okay.
I don't know if that makes sense.
No, that does. So that terms of reference, was that signed up by the New Plymouth District Council as well as a participant?
Well, what happened was there was a man called Frank Versteg. You may have come across him. He was the head of the planning team at the District Council for a number of years, and he had just retired. And Barbara McKerrow was the CEO of the day, and she arranged through the councillors and so on to put some money aside, and they contracted Frank in to work alongside us with the planners to start that process and to get that underway. Okay, no, thank you for that background and that history. Just one other question about, so this is within Taranaki iwi's rohe, Graham, that's what I think you mentioned.
Yes, it is. Yep.
Yes. Yes.
And the hapu is Ngā Mahanga a Tairi.
Yes.
So
yes.
this is our rohe within
Yes.
this particular area that we're discussing.
Yes, so we've heard from, is it Tane?
Tony, yes.
And he's
Tony
presenting
Martin.
tomorrow.
Yes, so that's great for us just to connect the people in the organisations. So look, I think that's everything we have. We'll hear from you again, I presume, in the rezoning hearing. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And just out of interest, will you be also in the coastal hearing, the hearing 8, which has been rescheduled for a bit later in the process?
I wasn't personally, I've only taken over as the chair
Okay,
since Doug's retirement.
yes, all right. So are there coastal erosion issues around Ohakura?
We've put a huge amount of work into that. We've soft armored the whole beach with dune replenishment and so on. And from the Ohakura River right through to the Timaru stream, we continue to work on that with council officers and one thing another. We've been very lucky because I think there's been quite a lot of aggregate coming down the Stony River, and the littoral drift is northward, so it keeps coming along our beachfront here. But it's, and talking to the experts, and there's some particularly strong people in the district here that know these things. Pete McComb, you might have heard of, is one of them. And he says to me, there might be enough aggregate coming down the Stony River for the next 100 years, which would be quite good, but it can all go in a storm, as you probably appreciate. That's one of the things. And once again, we've got a lot of good slave labour with the local schools and one thing another coming up and down and doing the planting and one thing another. And of course, if you get the kids involved, you get the parents as well, which is kind of neat.
Yeah, I had an interesting geography lesson I'm working on with Kapiti District on coastal erosion issues there, and apparently from some of the southern Taranaki rivers, the littoral drift is south. So
yes, it is south of the Cape. Yes,
yes, and all of Rangatiki, Wanganui, all that gravel feeds that big bump that sort of forms at Paraparaumu out in between Kapiti Island. A lot of that material's come down from your whenua. So yes, I think the Stony River is the
we've been lucky with that. I think the interesting thing is that they've found the same mineral deposits from the Stony River up at Cape Reinga. So, you know, and the other thing, of course, Farewell Spit, that's a good example of littoral drift as well, really. Very interesting stuff.
Very interesting. Well, thank you very much. Your evidence was very professional and very well put together. Really have to commend you on that, Graham. And really do appreciate you turning up, and we'll see you again in the rezoning hearing. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioners. We appreciate the opportunity.
Julie, is that us for the morning?
Yes, it is.
Yes. So thank you. We'll adjourn the hearing and return at 1 p.m. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Welcome back. And welcome to those that have just joined us. This is day 3 of hearing 17B relating to the rural zone provisions. And we are moving, I think, to Keith. You're up first.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, and good afternoon, Commissioner Littlejohn. Before I start, I'd like to put the apologies in of Mrs. Marsh. The dreaded COVID has struck our monitoring team. And as we have 3 sites we're currently monitoring, and Mrs. Marsh tried to tender her resignation in on last Sunday, she's been dragged out of retirement to be back on the site at EPR Road. So please put her apologies in. I can confirm once again that I'm representing my hapu on this matter, and they've asked me to present here. When we originally looked at the site, the rural production zone, we looked at this in the light of our hapu reserved lands being totally within this zone. However, we are proposing to rezone our lands as Maori purpose at a later hearing. We had originally decided to have a bob each way on this in case the Maori purpose zone hearing didn't go our way, but we've since decided to go for broke, and we're going to put all our eggs in the Maori purpose zone basket. So our submission today to the rural zone is rather brief, and I suspect that you have got my meeting notes there in front of you, Mr. Chairman.
We've got your evidence. Is there some additional notes?
There was some meeting notes that have been distributed, speakers notes that were distributed some time ago.
So I have
no.
got those. So would you like me to share on screen?
Thank you, Julie. In chapter 3, we say that we've got little concern with the Officer's 42A report. And our Hapu's general view is that in most circumstances, we think that landowners should be able to do what they like on their property, subject to certain criteria. And the criteria that we've got listed there is what we generally look at whenever anyone wants to do anything in our rohe. Now, all the matters that we have got addressed there are either contained in the rural productive zone objectives, policies, or rules, or they've already been addressed at other chapters, or they're soon going to be addressed at other plan hearings. So other than that, we don't have any major concerns with the production zone chapter. In our submission, we were pleased to see the changes of the wording in the overview. And if I can skip the objectives at the moment, we can accept the policies, and we're pleased to note the changes made, and we can accept the rules that have been set out. The only issue that we've got is in objective 4, and we've included that at the end of that speaking notes of the changes we'd like. And this is all to do with the recognition of our marae, urupa, and sites of significance within the rural production zone. And the importance of this is that it's mentioned in the overview of this chapter as an addition, where it notes the rural zone also contains marae sites, urupa, and sites and areas of significance to Maori. We asked Council to include that in Objective 4 as a matter of principle to us as an existing use of what's happening, and Council rejected this. We say that if Council are going to set the criteria for planned character and amenity in Objective 4, and that's the purpose of Objective 4, but then they leave out our marae, urupa, and sites of significance, it suggests to us that they do not take our existence in the production zone very seriously. If these are not included, Council are in essence saying such matters are indeed not planned, and we can't accept that. We believe we should be part of the planned rural environment, and the wording or words that we would like are included in the Objective 4 that's on screen. And that's it, Mr. Chairman. We can live with everything else in the rural production zone. It's just the wording in Objective 4 that we would like to add. And I thank you very much for your time and happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Keith. Kit, any questions from you?
Just check the dreaded mute button. Tēnā koe, Mr. Holswitch. Thank you once again for coming and presenting to us. Yeah, it's a very simple request. And I suspect that, well, if the purpose of the objective is to state the world as it is, and as a matter of fact, the rural production zone contains marae, urupa, and other sites and areas of significance to Maori, then it simply it's just logical to reference them there. The purpose of this bit of the objective, though, is to specifically record that the character amenity of the zone includes low density built form with open space between buildings, and then it goes on to describe the activities that happen in those buildings.
Yes.
So to the extent that sites and areas of significance to Māori do not don't manifest in a built form, would you accept that there's no real need, or they don't really fit within this aspect of the objective? I mean, I expect that marae with the various structures that would be part of a marae, and potentially urupa, but again, they may be fairly low density in terms of a structural element, could be incorporated or referenced in the objective. But where there's no real manifestation in terms of a low built form, do you think it makes any difference to not specifically reference it here?
I accept your point on that, and perhaps everything except marae can be removed, but marae and the associated buildings and anything that comes with the marae, I think should be included on there.
Yeah, I mean, and exactly, the objective already sort of, attempts to do that with community activities to some extent, rural halls, domains, and schools. So there wouldn't seem to me, it wouldn't be a stretch to incorporate marae and associated buildings and structures that are associated with marae in there.
Correct. Now, council, when they said that was not to go in, was because it had been covered in other places. That's fair enough. But when we looked at policy 1, and policy 1 talks about Māori purpose activities in a planned character for the production zone. If Māori purpose activities are not included in objective 4, then the policy 1 refers to something that's not actually talked about. So by including the word marae and perhaps associated buildings, that covers everything to us, and we would be happy with that.
Okay. I mean, between you and me, I'm still struggling with the notion of maintaining a planned character. You're either maintaining the world as it is, or you are actively encouraging it to evolve into something else that you've described. And the purpose of this objective in its original form was to say that the predominant character, and I think that sort of made sense, because there's no one homogeneous character that goes throughout an area, particularly not a zone as extensive as this within New Plymouth. So you couldn't, I mean, if you were to describe all of the things that make up the character and amenity of the rural production zone, you'd have a list that would go on quite substantially, I would suggest. So I can see why the original drafters of this objective used the phrase predominant. To change it to planned, I'm still sort of working that through, because it suggests that there is a character that is different to what is there at present that everyone's aspiring to. Whereas I think what we're actually saying is that the existing character and amenity is maintained. And that's the point of the objective. So look, that's not for you to answer. I'm just using you as a sounding board, because you're the first one to really draw attention to the wording of this objective. But I'll ask you, do you have a particular view on this?
I don't like the words maintained anywhere. And if I can, I recall the plan change for the rural zone back in whenever it was, plan change 17, where it was proposed that the rural character be maintained. And I held up a photograph of New Plymouth taken in 1848 and said, if the city founders had wanted to maintain the rural character, we would still look like that today. That went down like a ton of bricks. So that's why I don't like those things maintained. We're always evolving. So yeah, that's my comment on that.
Yeah, and I guess to some extent the way the policy framework is structured is through the policies that identify compatible and incompatible activities, and how that then provides leeway for growth and change within the zone to some extent.
Yes, I think you've got an existing accepted use for a particular zone, and anything else that wants to come in has probably got to fit in with that existing use. That's not planning speak, I realise, but that's the way I see it.
I mean, would you agree with me that character and amenity is more than just what you can physically see in terms of manifested in vegetation and buildings? Well, I'll put it another way, Keith.
Yeah.
Do you think that there's still room to accept as a matter of fact that part of the character and amenity of the rural production zone in the New Plymouth district is the fact that there are significant landforms and historic sites that are associated with tangata whenua?
Absolutely, and I think council have been tied up with this notion that when you leave town and you get to the 80 or 100 km/h zone, speed zone, all of a sudden the character of the area changes instantaneously from a built-up environment to one of open farmlands. And it doesn't take into account exactly what you're talking about. The views that we've got of that land doesn't take that into account. So yeah, I agree with you there.
I mean, the wonderful geological features down south Taranaki, I mean, they are definitive of that sort of character of the rural area. And that's just one bit of it. I mean, Taranaki is an incredibly diverse landscape. And you know, I'm just having a conversation with you about it because you brought it up. So, and there's still issues that I've got going through my head about what we're actually saying here with a policy framework and what we're trying to achieve. I think I've got it clear in my head from listening to Ms. Y and Ms. Young, what we actually want to see happen with these zones. But I'm still sort of struggling with some of the language they're promoting to do it. But again, that's just between you and me. Okay.
we're on the record here, so I think it's with Keith and you and all the rest of those
and everyone else. Yes, I know. I was being facetious, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
But apart from that sort of conversation, I take on board what you're saying and the insertion, and I think there is some merit there to think about how you could incorporate that within a statement about the existing character and amenity of the rural zone. I mean, it's not just patches of vegetation, pastures, and buildings.
Thank you very much.
A whole lot of other things that go into it. Yeah. Okay. Bye.
Keith, I have a follow-up question to that line of questioning and one other question. Would you agree that the character of the New Plymouth district in terms of marae and the amount of cultural landscape that is in the rural zone is quite distinctive and different to, say, what you might find in the middle of the South Island and the Mackenzie country, where you probably wouldn't see or the sites of significance would be much more remote and not as congregated in one place. Is that a fair?
Absolutely. And even if you go over the East Coast or up north, the landscape is different up there with all those cultural sites and marae, and those are the sort of things I look out for. And it's huge up north and on the East Coast. We're probably in the middle. South Island, there's not much there at all. It varies from place to place throughout the country.
No, I'm interested in just on that planned character word. I think that originated from a Kāinga Ora submission that we originated in the MPSUD that we picked up as being a reasonable proposition in the strategic objectives, and we plugged it in there. So I think that's where it's come from my own memory, and it's filtered back down through the various chapters we've been hearing from the planners as something that, and this would be, yeah, interesting to hear back from Denise and Louise. Todd, perhaps in closing, just in the right reply, my understanding of it is, and it's a character as we have now, but also what's anticipated in the zones, various zones and overlays by way of permitted, controlled, restricted discretionary activities. It's the sorts of things that are expected. So perhaps a mix of that.
I think, sir, that this will be covered by other iwi groups in far more detail than what we have, given that we are now concentrating on the Maori purpose zone rather than the rural zone. I'm sure that others will cover that in more detail.
Thank you. Keith, my second question is about your upcoming rezoning hearing. You mentioned taking your reserve lands into the Maori purpose zone. That's what you're seeking.
Correct.
And you said that you were throwing all your eggs into that basket. I just wanted to perhaps provide a little bit of commentary and also a question. When rezonings are heard through district plan reviews, they quite often come to hearings panels with a reasonably sort of skinny basis, on the basis that you just by a quick submission you might change what's been notified in the plan in terms of a zone provision. And as decision makers, we really do need to look at all of the, pretty comprehensively, the reasons and the evidence for a change of zoning, as you would do in a private plan change. Or so just getting ready for that does mean that clearly we'll need to see some very, very good evidence on all the matters that are relevant. I'm assuming that you're onto that, but I have been on other cases where just by a sentence or two in a submission, the submitters are hoping that the area might be rezoned without the necessary justification we need to consider. So that's an observation. The second one is more for Julie's ears. We heard yesterday in relation to the future urban zone, I'll try and not use that terrible word, fuzz, the south one in Ohakura, that we may well be expecting some considerable amount of evidence there. How much evidence are you looking at bringing, and how long do you think we need to set aside for hearing your rezoning request around your reserves, Keith?
Probably half an hour.
Okay.
Our main concern about that was that in the sites of significance hearing, we were scathing of council's interaction with us, and it's the same with the reserves. We were never approached, and the council 42A report clearly shows that every iwi and every hapu in the district was given the opportunity to present for Maori purpose zones. We were not. And we want nothing more than what the other zones are. We've got marae sites, we've got kainga sites, we've got sports ground sites, we've got urupa all together, and we want to put those as Maori purpose zone lands.
Okay, so those are the reserves.
So we're putting together a case for that right now.
Okay, so Julie,
thank you for your comments.
Yes, thank you. Julie, just we've got 3 days set aside for the rezoning hearings, I know. So you and I, we can talk offline about this, but I think Kit raised yesterday that sometimes in our experience, these rezoning hearings do take quite a lot of time in terms of evidence, and just make sure we've got the right planning for that in terms of that hearing coming up. Keith, that is all. Thank you again. Could you give your whānau just our regards in terms of this evolving COVID situation in different households?
Yes.
As a matter of fact, and I think I won't be alone, that I'm seeing all sorts of contacts being made to me of friends and family that are starting to get their first COVID case in their families. And it's just today I've heard 3 or 4 close family and friends that are now being going into isolation. So I think we're in the heart of it now. So, but do pass on our regards to the whānau.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your time, and apologies to Marlene. I told her I'd be in and out in 10 minutes. It's taken. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thank you. All right. Thank you very much. We are now moving to Marlene. Thank you.
Kia ora. Julie, I had a PowerPoint that Christine put in the folder. Doesn't matter which way. Okay. Yep. Thank you. Kia ora, thank you for letting Ngāti Muringa present about this. We've just got two main points we wanted to talk about, one of which we started to talk to you about in the sites of significance hearing, and that was about production forestry. We put forward a suggestion that there be a new rule that made it a restricted discretionary activity to plant on or near a site of significance to Māori. And our main thinking about this was that we've had so much trouble when people actually go to log these sites. We've had about 4 sites logged over the last 10, 15 years, and all of them have involved quite a significant damage. There are good rules, like you have to have resource consent, you have to have archaeological authorities, you have to, you know, involve monitoring in that, but there doesn't seem to be any way to get the logs off the sites without causing some damage. When we've been approached by lots of landowners asking us, can they plant production forestry on these sites? And we've had to tell them, yes, you can, but we've also quite often put them in touch with landowners that have been involved in the logging, so that they know about the problems, and also know that in some cases the amount of trouble you have to go to prevent the damage, it becomes fairly uneconomic to take the logs off. I know in some places they've got people to helicopter the logs off. I can't think of anywhere that they've done that in Taranaki. Though interestingly enough, we're having that happen tomorrow with some power poles being taken off 2 of our sites by Powerco. We always support resource consent applications and archaeological authority applications to remove the trees, because we've had problems when people haven't logged them because of the problems of removing them, but they get blown over eventually. And then I didn't have any pictures of the logging in Ngāti Muringa, but Dan McCurdy provided me these quite startling pictures of some logging activity on a pa in South Taranaki. And we haven't had anything that extreme, but you can sort of see the damage that can happen. So there's that one, and then there's the final slide, which just shows, and the track's been put right up the side of the pa site and then over the top. Yeah, so I couldn't find any reason in the Section 42A report why they rejected our request. I might have missed it, and also I'm can quite accept that we didn't write it in the right way for a plan. But yeah, we would like that to be considered again, or somehow this get prevented from happening. Okay, we'll go on to goats. Thank you. We want to support the fact that the Section 42A has extended the buffer zone around, or made it a restricted discretionary activity around the maunga for 2 kilometres. We support that DOCA supporting that also be included around the Paraninahi project area. We would like it around Taramoko and Poiatua conservation areas, but we note that that's not supported by anyone else. We think that Paraninahi is a really good example of where that rule should apply. It's got really high biodiversity values, and it's a fairly unique ecosystem in Taranaki, in that the vegetation goes from the coast right into the lowland. It also has had a lot of money spent on goat control, and we've managed to get the goats largely eliminated within the block. And this has been backed up by some eDNA results that Project Moana carried out. But our problem is that they just reintroduce themselves from around the boundaries. Now, Paraninihi is fortunate that it's probably the only piece of forest in Taranaki that's got guaranteed in perpetuity funding to carry out pest control under the Mount Messenger. It's part of the Mount Messenger Pest Management Area. So because of that, it's guaranteed that there will be money to spend on keeping the goats eliminated from within the block. So I think that it would be really good that this was supported by having that 2 kilometre buffer zone. It's obviously a win-win with the biodiversity and the high cultural values. I spent some years a while ago surveying forests in Taranaki for the Department of Lands and Survey, and I think my experience of people is that they underestimate the amount of damage that goats can do. We've got some examples here of their behaviour, which seems hell-bent on actually killing the plants off rather than just grazing them. And in combination with the possums and the cattle, if you don't control your goats, they are capable of clear felling your forest. So unless you get them under control, you may as well just get a chainsaw and chainsaw the whole forest down, because eventually they will kill it off. They have 3 main effects. They change the structure. If you can see, looking at that forest, it's got very little undergrowth in it, and forest in Taranaki is supposed to have good layer of seedlings on the bottom, and then you go to the undergrowth, and then you go to the understory. Goats do manage to clear out the seedlings from the bottom and the understory. The seedlings because they're young and they taste good, and the understory because what they do is they clear out the ones that they like eating. So they are capable, and they have done, particularly in the middle of the island, they've changed the actual forest type from being a shrubland or a forest into be a meadowland, which means it's just got sort of grass species on the bottom and the occasional tree. And that's what happens if you leave goats alone. They also, because they have very preferential grazing, they really seem to like eating some plants and not like others. So they can actually create local extinctions of plants. And if they're over a wide area, of course, that happens over the whole forest. And that's got real cultural implications, because the plants that they like eating are quite often plants that are used for specific purposes. And so they actually, the goats change the whole whakapapa of the forest. They also like camping in the sun. So they'll sit there and clear a little space in the sun where they will camp during the daytime, and that can lead to erosion. So I don't think we can underestimate the effect that not controlling goats has on our forests. I think there's a bit of a problem we're going to have with this rule, and with the way the council's viewing it, especially in the Section 42A report, said it's not so clear cut between feral and farmed goats. It's more sort of a continuum. Like on one end, you've got the milking goats, which everyone is probably quite happy about, which are completely domesticated, don't run away, and if they do, people chase them because they're worth so much. But then you've also got milking herds that people have largely sort of tried to domesticate the feral goats, and they do tend to run away. You also have sort of large populations that people will keep on their property to sell live. There used to be quite a good market in the sale of live goats, so that people would keep them. And you also had people selling them for meat. There was quite a good market, particularly going up to Auckland for goat meat. The other thing that people tend to like goats for is weed control. They do some of the weed species that the TRC have control over, the goats will actually eat or keep down to sort of a level where the TRC can't see them anyway, so they don't come and bother you. So we've had problems at Paraninihi and at Taranoko with people not wanting the goats controlled on their property, even though you'd probably look at them and think they're feral, but in fact, they are farming them and breeding them because there's an economic gain to them. And goats are very clever. I think people think they're really dumb, but because of their behaviour, we've had problems in Paraninihi where the goats shooters are inside the block. They go to shoot the goats hightail it out of the block to the property where they know the farmer doesn't allow shooting. And if you've ever seen a herd of goats just jump straight over a fence, it's quite something to watch. And basically they sit on the other side of the fence laughing at the hunters, like what it feels like to the hunters anyway. As soon as the hunters go back into the block, they jump back over and start feeding on them. So I think we need to think about that definition between farmed and feral goats. Yeah, and that's all I've really, oh, sorry, there's a next picture. My last slide, which shows you what happens when you eliminate the goats. Okay, so what you've got here is a vegetation plot. And the point of vegetation plots is that you fence them so that you can tell the difference between, so that you actually can measure scientifically the effect of the grazing animals on your vegetation. So if you look at that, how healthy it looks within the plot and how sparse is outside it. In places like the Maunga and Paraninihi, our vegetation plots look the same on both sides of the fence now. So that's how important it is to control goats. And that's me. Thank you.
Kit, any questions from you?
Yeah, Kia ora, thanks for that, Marlene. That was very helpful. I was just going back and checking Ngāti Mutunga's submission, and you quite clearly ask for these areas to be incorporated within the rules, so there's obviously scope for that. Are you aware of whether any parties put in a further submission in opposition to this increase of the goat farming requirement?
No.
You're not aware, or you are aware that
I checked the further submissions, and as far as I know, no one has.
Right. So we've got scope to extend this rule to apply to areas other than just the main national park. Okay, that's good. In terms of the Paraninihi, are you aware of whether there are any goat farming activities up around that park?
There are no what you would call strictly goat farming. There's no milking herds. The nearest milking herd's about 6 or 7 kilometres away on the main road.
Okay.
There are landowners who encourage the goats to stay on their property. Yeah. So although people would look at them and say they're feral goats, in my opinion, they're partly farmed.
Okay.
Because they don't allow, they want them there and they don't allow shooting.
Are the what's the sort of the state of the fencing around these conservation areas? Are they sorry, it varies a bit. They're definitely, it's very, goats are really good at getting over fences. Like they're definitely, Paraninihi is mainly cattle fenced. And so is most of the Maunga, as far as I know. But won't keep the goats out. Yeah, that won't keep the goats out. They will.
No, absolutely not. They just, it's like it's not there.
Okay. You talk in paragraph 13. There's a acronym there, EDNA. Can you tell me what that is?
My correction setting.
EDNA testing.
Oh, it's eDNA testing. So what it's really this real fancy way of doing things that we're doing quite a lot of nowadays. You go and put a syringe or some water through a filter from a stream, and it will pick up all the animals that are upstream from it.
I see now. I should have worked that one out. eDNA. Got it. All right. I mean, it's okay. Oh, that makes sense. So they can actually tell by sampling within the area whether there are goats using it.
Yep. Goats, humans, cows. Yeah, it's really exciting. Yeah.
It's like when they test the water that comes out of the sewage plants and can tell that there's COVID in the community. It's staggering how well you can pick up the viruses.
It's a bit scary, really.
Scary. Yeah, it's another way of putting it. Okay. No, I think I was going to ask you what are the species that goats like munching on the most, but I see in your submission you've referred there to ka, puka and mahui as
Yeah.
some of
Yeah.
the juicy ones they like to eat.
Yeah, yeah. They'll eat any seedlings basically, but the growing up ones, yeah, that's two of their favourites. They also like things like pura weta, and yeah.
Cool. All right.
Good
No,
job,
thank,
yep.
thank you, Marlene. That's really helpful.
Marlene, as a visual person, those PowerPoint presentations and as you're apt to do are really great. The image of the saplings being basically ring barked over the height of a goat to the height of a goat. Just what an incredible photo that is, and quite often that's the most powerful evidence we can see when people bring to us actual real photographs of things. I'm interested, obviously, with my involvement with Mount Messenger hearing in 2018. I'm interested in just the geography, and I wonder whether just with some mapping we could see, you could point out these key areas, or are they?
Yep, no, I can send you a map showing you where the farmland adjoins. There's two problems at Paraninihi. There's areas of farmland that adjoin that, some of which we can and some of which we can't hunt on. There's also dock areas where the goat control hasn't been up to what it has been within the block. So the goats come in from then. Obviously, the dock areas to the east will all be under the PMA. So hopefully and they've actually started the goat control there already. Yeah.
Yes. These other areas apart from Paraninihi, are those mapped somewhere? Were they?
Yeah, I'll get you a map. So I think we sent you a map when we talked about because they're part of the Tikuhanga Huru, but I can resend you that map. Yeah.
Yes.
Taramoko is completely surrounded by privately owned land. Yeah, with people having different ideas about goats on. And obviously there's good reasons for people not wanting people to shoot on their land. I can quite accept that. Just when they're farming the goats, it becomes a bit of a problem. Yeah.
But that long term, as you say, enduring funding as part of the Mount Messenger offset package does set out that Paraninihi area to be it's going to be incredibly valuable for the nation, because it has those mountains to the sea. Undisturbed vegetation types, so that is incredibly unique and quite a treasure, I think, for your part of the world. And,
it's going to make a huge difference. It's really amazing.
Thank you, Marlene.
Thank you.
Hear from you again. Is Sarah online? Sarah Gibson.
She's showing us online. She may have popped away. We do have Fern Brand online, I think, for Puketapu.
Oh, okay. So Fern's here for Puketapu Hapu. Okay, we'll start with you then, Fern. Thank you.
Kia ora. Just sorting out there we go. Kia ora.
Welcome back.
Nice to be here. So yeah, interesting kōrero. I've learnt more about goats than I thought I already knew. But kia ora, Marlene.
Commissioner Littlejohn is our resident expert now. He's been asking all the questions, which is great.
So yes, Fern Brand representing Puketapu Hapu, particularly around the future urban zone FIZ considerations for today. So I guess there are three specific areas, but I'll get to that. So my understanding about this whole process is to do better. So to make the necessary changes to the district plan of New Plymouth in order to generate a better designed, controlled and moderated outcome. Future and urban zones are supposed to identify and indicate what might be appropriate activities or uses in a particular area, in a given area, to govern the development in order to allow for the sustainable and responsible expansion of New Plymouth. All I can offer this forum today is my experience of what happens when this process is flawed or not implemented correctly. And so in my experience, speaking on behalf of Puketapu, the negative impacts resulting in the improper planning at this early stage of a future urban zone consideration, and therefore structure planning also. So yeah, particularly in response to Area Q, Area N, which is Orapuriri, and Area R, which is out by near the airport, are the three specifically within Puketapu. Firstly, we do not support, or we oppose the zone change in Area N, which is Te Orapuriri, Pa, surrounding areas, from rural to industrial. Partly on the basis that there is sufficient land in this area already zoned industrial and ready for development. Significant amounts, in fact, that is more than enough to meet the forecast need. And there is a lot of other considerations with the particular area identified that still need resolution. They've still yet to be worked through, given the tight timeframes we've had recently to consider it. A lot of those matters are still outstanding, in our opinion. Secondly, we have no understanding of how Area R, as a future urban zone, has been identified as business land. There's been no notification, no conversation, no engagement occurred here in respect to that decision. So an example, I guess, of when the process is not followed. And thirdly, Area Q, I guess, is where I'll focus most of my attention today. This has been, amongst others, our battleground, I guess, in the environmental and cultural landscape space, pushing for better development and design overall. So we as a hapu have had many harsh lessons learnt in this particular area, and we've had to take it upon ourselves to inject ourselves in the development here. So it has been a long process and quite wearying. And I've had to develop a thick skin, amongst others, but also learn the process, and also, again, with those harsh lessons, know how to do things differently going forward in order to achieve a better outcome. So, and one of those considerations was understanding the district plan, how that allowed for some of the development that took place, but also how to then input to the changes in the district plan in order to gain a greater benefit to everybody, and drive better decision making and design at the end. So in October of 2013, Puketapu submitted on a plan change for Area Q alongside all of the other submitters. There was no prior engagement, and our feedback was not actually reflected in the plan change at all. So that was the sum total of our engagement. We're currently encountering and dealing with every single one of our submission points now, none of which were taken into consideration in that 2013 plan change, structure change. So the greenfield subdivisions and development of Area Q are raising all of those issues, I guess, as we speak. So. In response to that, working with MPDC, given that they were along for the journey, a cultural value statement was created, I guess, developed, and that was a resource that we developed in order to inform and to try, it was in our effort to explain to developers, planners and MPDC alike our values and priorities in the landscape within Puketapu, particularly with consideration to development, to land use, how we would like the streams and waterways, wetlands and resources treated, and the effects on those, and sort of just our values and priorities within the new communities in those areas. So, and that was an effort to avoid having to start from the scratch point with each and every one of those developments, which is where we found ourselves. So we were hoping that that would make a difference. It would probably, hopefully, alleviate 6 months of hard conversations, potentially wasted resources on behalf of developers and the landowners, and actually come to a better outcome quicker, really. And that was specifically generated out of the activity from within the Bell Block to Area Q area, but it applied to primarily the Tarohio Puketapu. That particular structure plan still does not reflect our input, and the one that we'll be considering in upcoming hearings. Again, some of the roading network, but also a lot of the catchment of the Waitaha. We've actually had a significant piece of work done around the entire watercourse assessment and restoration opportunities. Two of, I wouldn't be able to name how many wetlands have been identified and recognised in the proposed new structure plan, but there are significantly more. And so just wondering why there was such a disconnect between work that is already underway with council and the proposed district plan structure change to the same area, given that this work is already underway and well and truly socialised within council. So yeah, pushing for better, pushing to get more recognition in that area, looking to master plan effectively that area to ensure that the new communities which it will service have sufficient connectivity, access to healthy and vibrant natural spaces, and that those waterways are treated with respect and are upheld in the design of those future communities and subdivisions. So that's the epicenter effectively of what we're trying to achieve in that area, looking at it as a catchment. It's a small catchment, it's achievable. Currently working with a subdivider as a pilot around how that might look in a particular tributary and how that might be applied, working with the council, working with developers, their landowners, to the rest of that tributary and catchment area. So, and that goes as far as, considerations, sort of where do you put your sewer, right next to the awa is no longer the best result. I mean, we have examples every month when it rains heavily, why you don't do that. The next catchment over being the most significantly impacted one. We want to avoid that happening again. Instead, we actually do want our local communities to be able to send their kids and play in the little pools and potentially even fish for tuna. So, and it's a healthy environment and healthy, I guess, food source, because it is significant for tuna, and there are several species of the kōkapu in that stream. So, I mean, it is known to be a significant, as well as, of course, it's a really hot spot for our cultural landscape and identity, and the entire catchment contains pā, kāinga, urupā, working locations, and hangakai. So we're just asking for better design, really. I guess I've covered most of what I wanted to do. I just have one more example, really, of when it doesn't go well. There's a residential zoned farmland in between Bell Block and the Waiwakaio industrial area on the seaward side of the motorway. We're currently working with a developer who's attempting to purchase a piece of land from a landowner who would like to put a significant subdivision there. This land has already been zoned residential with no conversation and no attempt to understand the landscape of the area, the cultural landscape, I should say. And he's now encountering significant cost and delay and stress, and I guess risks to himself personally as well as his business, because of the reality of that piece of land, its history, its kōrero, but also its tapu, physically impacts people when they visit there. And so as a hapu, we cannot, and we just cannot allow or condone, I guess, let alone facilitate for the subdivision on an area that not only do we fear for the future communities, but we would never live ourselves. And whom as a trustee myself, I would not be able to validate that to my uri. So it's, again, trying to work with that landowner to understand the actual landscape and what might be possible there, what mitigations could be identified, but also understanding that I'm not the person to identify those or what they are either. We need our tohunga there to advise us in that regard. But again, all of those conversations have gone on deaf ears. And so we remain in that situation now. But had that conversation taken place early day, if that understanding and that attention, I guess, been received prior to the rezoning to residential, it would look differently, and potentially the development of that area, or the areas that are potentially able to be developed, would have been developed a lot easier, potentially earlier, and without as much stress and cost. So yeah, that future urban zoning, should it take its proper course, is essential, accompanied with the proper structure planning process. So yeah, just from me, my last 8 years in a snapshot. Happy to take questions.
Thank you, Fern. I'll just kick off by saying that on behalf of Kit, he was unfortunately not able to come to our site visit around the sites of significance, and also to say that we've heard from you around that hearing 14 SASM chapter, and we've heard some of the kōrero you've just given us today, but it's great for Kit to listen in as well as the fourth member of the panel. And also just a question, the structure plan hearing, which is coming up next, you're involved in that, I take it?
Yes.
And Kit and I, we're the ones sitting on that as well. So the good connection there. So I'll that introduction I'll hand over to Kit.
Look, Fern, that was really moving. So I'm grateful to have heard a snapshot of it. I don't have any questions for you though, but thanks for your evidence.
Kia ora.
And I don't have any further questions either, Fern. And we look forward to hearing from you in the other hearings. Thank you for your assistance.
Thank you for your attention. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Hey Sarah, how are you?
Good, thanks. How are you, Stephen?
Yeah, pretty good. So are you up next? We did have a slot for looking at the hearing schedule.
I think, Stephen, that was my mistake in understanding who Sarah was submitting for at the hearing today.
Gotcha. So Sarah, you're here for the Maunga project, is that right?
Correct, and following that to talk about the future urban zone on behalf of Tawhirikura.
Okay, so we've got both of those. Great. Thank you.
Ka pai. Mō tēnā koutou. Kei te mihi ki a koutou tuatahi. I hui mai nei. he mokopuna hau o Taranaki Maunga mena I rere atu ki te moana, kei te taha, kei te tonga, kei reira tōku ia o te whenua o Waingongoro, ki I te hitaha o ku whānau Ngāti Manihia kai, o kahu ineo awai, me Ngāti Tū, kei tā nota, kei reira tōku ia o te whenua o Waiwhakaio, ki I te hitaha tōku whānau Te Atiawa, o tira tōku whānau Ngāti Tāwhirikura, ko Sarah Jane Te Araro Gibson tōku ingoa, he pau waka haere au o te kaupapa maunga. Tēnā koutou. Kia ora, so I'm here to talk to you about the rural production zone and specifically the restrictions of goats around the Maunga. So my role is with the Taranaki Maunga project as a co-project manager alongside Sean Zilchers. And really the main points of my submission today, you can take as read, but is really around what the Taranaki Maunga project has been structured, developed to achieve, and the investment that the partnership of Taranaki Maunga has made, and the role that the district plan has in supporting the aspirations of the Taranaki Maunga project. So I'll just massage out a few of those points. So the Taranaki Maunga project, as you know, is a partnership project. It was established early on in the settlement, early phases of settlement, to be that vehicle moving forward to restore the Maunga in all its essence. The partnership spans local governments, so it's Papa Atawai, local iwi and hapu, and also philanthropy groups. And it's broadly speaking, its role is to remove those pests from the landscape to allow that wildlife to flourish, and also reintroducing some of those species. The partnership that we speak of has been working hard on the removal of goats. So Te Papa Atawai has, as you would have heard or will hear in Mr. Jared Coombs' evidence, they've been leading the goat aspects of the goat eradication program, and significant investment and effort has gone into that. Also, the Taranaki Maunga project has also invested quite a bit in the project as well, upwards of $2 million to achieve the removal of goats. It's important just to acknowledge that although that is our vision and that's our pathway, the project doesn't operate in isolation. We're also reliant on the community and the role of district plan to put in provisions to keep goats away from the national park boundary. I guess the risks associated with not having clear defined provisions around that exclusion area of goats, the risk is that it just undermines the investment and effort that goes into the partnership, that goes into the restoration of the Maunga. And again, it's a community aspiration to have that Maunga as well as it could be, or as well as it should be. So those provisions need to be clear and they need to be adhered to. So yeah, just in my opinion, the district plan does have a huge role in supporting this and supporting our kaupapa of Taranaki Maunga and keeping those goats away from the park. Cool. That's my submission. So if there's any questions, I'm happy to take them.
Thank you, Sarah. We'll kick off again with Kit. Thank you.
I was just going, Check. Yes, I'm off mute. Thanks for that, Sarah. That's very helpful. What's just a question around the fencing around the farm, around the park? I mean, how much is invested in putting in fencing around the park to keep all of these sorts of wandering herbivores out?
Well, that would be, I'm not sure what the level of investment is, but that would be a landowner, a part of their obligation to just keep their properties fenced. I'm sure it's significant, the amount of landowners that have fenced their properties around the boundary, but I'm not sure what that level of investment is.
So the project itself, does it have a budget for fencing at the park at all?
No,
Okay.
no. Our method of removal or control is really hunting. So we've had hunters that have worked on the maunga for a long time now, removing those goats. Yeah.
I don't know if you were at an earlier hearing. I think I've mentioned that my father was one of those hunters back there in, I think, the 1960s. I think he spent a lot of his time up hunting for goats. So it's been a long, long project.
Yeah.
Thanks for that. That was the only question really, was just to get a sense of what the money's being mostly spent on, but that's good. Thanks for that, Sarah.
Thank you.
Sarah, your evidence is very clear, and we're going to hear some expert evidence from Doc as well tomorrow about this issue. So clearly there's a key partnership with yourselves and Doc, so we're looking forward to hearing that. I'm from the East Coast, where goats are rabid as well, all around the East Coast hill country. Certainly the feral goats seem to be hugely tuned into our environment and very nimble and hard to control. I certainly appreciate the problem. So look, I don't have any questions other than a te reo explanation for the couple of the terms you've used. So you mentioned in paragraph 9 the evidence of Jamie Tuta, and you use the term mata waka. Can you just tell me what that means?
Yeah, so I guess those that haven't come on the traditional Māori waka, so those of our Pākehā whānau.
Okay, yeah, I haven't heard that before, but that's actually quite a interesting term. And Hei Kawa Ora in the next paragraph.
Yeah, so He Kawa Ora is, in its essence, is the bringing of life or bringing to life. It's our foundation karakia that the project was built off, and I'm not sure if you remember our evidence from the biodiversity and Indigenous heritage chapter, where we drew out quite a lot of the kupu within that karakia, which demonstrates I guess the acts or the roles that we take in our obligation to removing the pest to let the landscape flourish. So He Kawa Ora is bringing life back to the maunga.
Yes, I recall that. And and we got some of the that translated for us during that hearing. I think Sarah Marco kindly got some of that key reference translated, which I've got with my hearing 5 schedules. I must say, I've got now a whole bookcase full of information, and as we make our recommendations and decisions, we need to go back and look at all these cross references. So thank you, Sarah, for just coming on this particular topic and linking us into the Maunga project and this rule around goat control, which obviously very, very important. So I think we're finished again for the day. And
sorry, no, I think sorry, Sarah did clarify she's now would like to speak on behalf of the hub.
The hapu. Okay. Thank you, Sarah. Yeah, sorry about that.
Good. So yeah, I would like to talk about the future urban zone, similar to Fernbrand. Yeah, Ngāti Tāwhiri Kura hapu au, he pau waka haere o te kaupapa ka waka ara te tangata ka waka ora te wai ka waka hui te taonga, which is a restoration project about bringing our people back to restore the awa and to allow those taonga to flourish again. So as well as that, I'm involved in a few more things within the hapu landscape, and future urban zone is one of those things I'd like to present on. So a little bit about Ngāti Tāwhiri Kura and the rohe that we assert our authority over. So the rohe extends from Waitaha inland to Tārurutangi, up to Tahuna to Tawa, over the maunga, both peaks, Taranaki and Puakai, down to the Mangere district, and then follows the Waifakaio back out to the sea, and then back along to the coast to Waitaha. Our people lived, worked and died within our rohe. These are the tupuna of those that are obligated here today to preserve and protect our cultural landscape of Ngāti Tāwhiri Kura. So preserving this cultural landscape for us is about securing that relationship and that connection back to our tupuna, and in doing so, acknowledging the rights of our tupuna, of our uri of today, to preserve the natural, historical, cultural and spiritual association that we have with the whenua. So drilling down into the aspects of the future urban zone that relate to Ngāti Tāwhiri Kura, Smart Road has been designated as a fuzz area in the proposed district plan. So in the context of our tupuna, Smart Road was actually was the boundary line. It was marked by Po Tūtake at the original position of Po Tūtake, which was on the bend of the Waifakaio. And that Po faced towards Te Awa Tamarau, which is close by the meeting of the waters. It was one of our pa, one of Tamarau's pa, which is actually sat in the bed of the Waifakaio. The area was semi-braided. It's changed over time due to quarrying, but that line between the Po and between Te Awa Tamarau is the line of Smart Road. So that line actually, at one point in time dissected our cultural landscape as a mechanism to protect our tupuna, their whenua and their livelihood. It was a line where confiscation couldn't go past, out towards the Waifakaio Valley and out to Bow Block, where Fern and Puketapu reside. This boundary line was largely ignored, and land was confiscated under successive acts, and our tupuna were removed from the whenua. So in the current context, as we look from a bird's eye view, because we're no longer present in a lot of our spaces, Smart Road is actually now the heart of our rohe. So on the northeastern coastal margin sits Te Rewarewa Pa, which the commissioners went to visit. As we move inland, there lies Tārere Are and Kātere ki te Moana, which is one of our marae that you also attended. Bordering Smart Road is our tupuna awa of Waifakaio, and also Pueremu on the opposite side of Smart Road. Across this landscape, there are numerous pa, and currently Smart Road is under pressure from development, so incremental subdivision adjacent to Smart Road. We have the proposal for the Blue Haven development there, and proposed subdivisions on Smart Road as well for a number of houses. In terms of the outcomes we observe in the current operative plan, Fern has highlighted the challenges that have arisen in Area Q but also there's Waitara Area A and Waitara Area D, which will be acknowledged by Ms Mako and her evidence. And Ngāti Tāwherikura have no desire to repeat this in Aotearoa as urban development occurs. Also outlined by Ms Mako and her evidence, it's clear that rezoning of those particular areas in the operative plan have not benefited from the expertise of tangata whenua, and this has resulted in those legacy issues for the likes of Puketapu. Also, the opportunities have been lost for tangata whenua to realise and restore their relationship with these areas. Similar to the analogy said by Mr Glenn Skipper of bringing tangata back to whenua, that hasn't happened in the planning, the rezoning, the lack of structure planning for those areas. This has demonstrated a clear need for direct policies regarding structure planning prior to urban development, and in my opinion, the district plan has a key role in making this happen. So the expectations of Ngāti Tāwherikura of the district plan is that we support comprehensive planning approach through the implementation of the policy FUS P7. We encourage structure planning at speed to stay ahead of development pressure. Currently, Tāwherikura Hapu are working with Te Kotaitanga o Te Atiawa to develop a cultural values statement similar to what Puketapu did try in their planning, and also a master plan, which is a visual articulation of the cultural values statement for the entire rohe of Tāwherikura. So everyone knows how to develop, but in a way that protects and preserves. We also encourage, or our expectation is that any developers within our rohe go into a co-design process with Hapu, with Te Kotaitanga, looking from a catchment basis as opposed to individual subdivisions. Currently, we're working with some developers, and we're establishing a co-design process with them and with Te Kotaitanga, which is the expectation with those co-design processes, that it's a resource process to value the expertise of mana whenua throughout this. We believe that there's no reason why this process cannot be extended more broadly to other developers. We recently just received a resource consent for a development, a subdivision in the Smart Road area, I think it was last week, but we we extend the invite out to that developer and any others that want to, well, we require them to do this co-design process with us. Receiving consents in that manner to try and run ahead of the rezoning process will not be supported by Ngāti Tāwherikura. So in essence, I support the Section 42 recommended changes to policy FUS P7 and the amendments of Ms Mako, including the requirement to engage the expertise of tangata whenua to inform these proposed developments and structure planning. Kia ora, I'm happy to take any questions.
Sarah, did you, just on that, were you reading from something you've prepared in writing?
Yep, so yeah, I can
Yeah,
submit that.
those speaking notes were really helpful to us. So if you could get them to us via Julie, that'd be great.
Sure.
So Kit, just handing to you.
Yeah, look, I didn't have any questions, Sarah. Thank you very much.
And Sarah, certainly just reconfirming your rohe, the geography and how it relates to Smart Road in terms of your hapu is really was really good for me. I'm slowly getting my head around the various and understand the catchment based relevance of your planning vision, I suppose. Acknowledge you on that, and certainly the PO, which was put up. I've certainly read quite a bit about that in various histories as being a very key dividing line, I suppose, which was established, and then history is history after what happened with that. So just want to acknowledge that as well as bring that to our attention. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Julie, I think that is our finish now.
Yes.
Yes, so we'll adjourn the hearing till tomorrow at 9:30. We'll be having a bit of a late start. Thank you very much for your attendance. Sarah, did you want to say something, Sarah Marco?
Yeah, sorry, Commissioner Dace. I just said I wondered if there was I have a procedural matter that I wondered if we could just, if I could ask you now. I just caught the end of Keith's kōrero around the proposed rezoning of some of their properties.
Yes.
Some of the Ngāti Rāhiri properties that are obviously rural now, and just in light of the evidence that we did submit yesterday in relation to the multi-purpose zone. So
okay, so that's really come through. Yes.
So I've submitted planning evidence to the multi-purpose zone, but we will work with our hapu, and Keith will definitely keep far more diligent than me, submitted his evidence. So we will work with our hapu over the next couple of weeks to get that multi-purpose zone some evidence to, but I guess my concern is that in the section 42A for the multi-purpose zone in particular, is the spatial extent of the zone has been deferred to hearing 22, which is the rezoning request. So I guess for us, in particular, I'm hoping that our hapu will speak in relation to the importance of the multi-purpose zone, but they'll also have to return to speak to the hearing 22.
Yes.
To hearing 22 as well. So I just really, if I can, I'm not sure if that's part of procedure, if I can ask for that guidance from you around when you would prefer to receive that evidence. Is it at hearing 21, or is it best at hearing 22, or is it both of them?
Yes, I haven't caught up with the I've got to start reading for hearing 18 when we finish this. So my comments to Keith were really perhaps more general about the practice of seeking rezoning through district plan processes. They're quite often seen as a convenient sort of shortcut, where particularly with a developer wanting to rezone land, it can be quite convenient, and it's just that the rules of evidence apply that we'll need to understand and have an evidential basis to make any of our recommendations. So certainly understand the cultural aspects of the multi-purpose zone, but if there were any other matters that changed or perhaps lead to our decision-making role, will it create more traffic? Those sort of more general planning issues, would normally want to see some evidence on that. In terms of timing, I do have in my bag our schedule, so just bear with me for a second. So we're currently at hearing 17B. We have multi-purpose zone hearing 21, which you've just submitted some evidence on. Is that right?
Yes, so we submitted that yesterday.
Yes, and then there's some rezoning request, which is hearing 22. That's the one that's follows in it 6th, 7th, 8th of April. That's probably where I think we'd want to see, reasonably fulsome evidential base for changing the zonings. But then that comes back perhaps to your skill, Sarah, as a planner, to think about what are the issues that we, as decision makers, we might need to cover off on. I haven't, to be honest, I'm starting to see the scope of the rezoning request, because helpfully Denise and Louise, Todd and others are signalling the numbers that are looking to come out of rural production into different zones. So we've got a feeling that there's a fair old number. And that was my query earlier on for Julie, just about the 3-day hearing. And we won't know until we start seeing people lining up to talk to us. But we do have some flexibility just to, I suppose, add some more days as we had to do for hearing 14. So the simple answer to your question is yes, keep the evidence as it is for 21, but have a think about the sorts of things we'd want to decide on a rezoning request as if it was, you know, perhaps a plan change or without going overboard. Is that helpful?
Yes, thank you. I think it's probably something the Hapu will raise through the evidence to 21, and then if the Hapu do need to, they can return to hearing 22 as well.
Yes, that's fine. Thanks for that, Sarah.
Right, thank you.
Are there any other questions before we have a karakia from someone? Marlene volunteered this morning, which was very good.
I can if you'd like.
Sarah, that'd be great. Thank you very much.
Ka pai. Nā reira mihi ki a koutou kua tae mai ki tēnei hui ki te whakawhiti kōrero o Pāniki tātou whenua. Tēnā koutou. Ko waka kapi tā tātou hui mai te karakia a te mātū. Kia wakaronga ki au ki te tangi atu manu nei atu mātū tuia. Tui I runga, tui I raro, tui I roto, tui I waho, tui te hiratanga, so ka rongo te pō, ka rongo tau. Tui e te mokutanga te I tākia waihe, waiki nui, waiki ro, waiki pomo. Ka hona wairua ki te waiao, ki te ao marama. Ui e tāi ki e. Tēnā koutou.
Thank you very much, Sarah, and we'll reconvene at 9:30 tomorrow morning. Thank you.